Fowler up the left wing. Holloway tried to walk it in. Look out, they give it up. It's coming in to Brusque on Hofer. Scores! Shorthanded goal. Pia Suter actually with the goal. And the Canucks have made it 4-1. A shorthanded goal scored by Vancouver. Get it out to Forbert. He's going to drag it back, and that's going to do it here. The final 5 seconds will tick off. Tough homestand for the St. Louis Blues. Unable to follow up a really solid victory in Vegas. The Blues fall 3 straight on home ice.
Not good enough in every area. Special teams, 5-on-5 play, D zone, neutral zone, O zone, coaching. We all weren't good enough tonight. Not acceptable.
3 coaches, Craig Berube, Drew Bannister, Jim Montgomery. 3 separate seasons, the exact same problems. That is the way that it's going for the St. Louis Blues. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. You got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. We're going to be talking a lot about the St. Louis Blues today, Alex. And it sounds like Doug Armstrong is going to be talking about the Blues a little bit later on this afternoon as well. He is meeting with the media as they take their morning skate. He'll be meeting with the media afterwards. We will have somebody there for that conversation. Don't have that live for you, but we will have clips to react to right here on BK and Ferrario. Alex, that was another opportunity for the Blues to get back into this thing. And every time they have these opportunities, they seemingly let it slip through their grasp. Now, they took advantage of what was ahead of them against Calgary. But we said at the time, and we meant it, and it's proven to be true, you can't just let this be 2 games where you got your fans excited, you really put your best foot forward, and then you let that chance slip through your grasp once again. But that's what they've done. 1-4 in their last 5 games. The 4 losses, 3 came against backup goalies. You look now at what's ahead of them. They have 31 games remaining in the regular season. According to Matthew DeFranks of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, they would need roughly 45 points to reach your typical threshold of 95 points on the season to get into the postseason. That would mean they would have to go something like 22-8-1 the rest of the way. To put that in context, that would be a 119-point regular season pace. That's what the Blues would have to do just to get to your typical playoff threshold. This team doesn't have that in them, man. We have seen enough at this point to know what this group is. They are inconsistent on a consistent basis. There are nights where they look excellent. They have some young players that you really like, and I still am happy about the long-term outlook for many of them. But for the 2024-25 season, a season that the Blues had sold us, based on their actions and their words, was about making it to the playoffs once again, this team ain't going to do that. We can call it today. They could go on this miraculous run and still fall short. This team has proven over the last really 2 to 3 weeks, they don't have what it takes to get into the playoffs in 2025.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what Doug Armstrong has to say, because they made all of the moves believing this was a team that could compete for a playoff spot. Not believing they could win a playoff series, not believe they could go to the Cup, believe they could fight for a playoff spot. And in the month of going even beyond the month of January, go back to a few games prior to the Winter Classic. You played Detroit, Nashville, and Buffalo. All 3 of those teams were in the middle of a losing skid. You won 2 of those 3 games. You lost to Buffalo. Should have been a 3-game win streak. Then you go to the Winter Classic, and you set the standard. You shut out the Ottawa Senators. You lose to Columbus, a team that, they were playing good, but a team that you still should have been more competitive than where you were at. Another 3-game losing or winning streak that was snapped. And then you lose to Columbus again. And then the most critical week of the year for the Blues, they backed up what they were saying. Every word that came out of Jim Montgomery's mouth, any player in that locker room's mouth, was, this is a critical stretch for us. We have to pick up points. And they were the superior team to Calgary. I know what Calgary's doing now, but for those 2 games in the middle of January, Calgary looked like an inferior opponent. Their top line was nothing. Their goaltender wasn't good. The Blues looked dominant. And then from there, I remember being in the locker room that Friday, hearing Radek Faksa talk about, look, we have to keep this thing going. We have to continue to build off of what we just accomplished. Dud versus Utah, you got a shootout win versus Vegas, but frankly, you gave up the 2 goals in the final 5 minutes.
And you should have had 2 points in regulation. Shouldn't have had to give up a point to Vegas.
You should have held on to that one. You lose to Vegas, you lose to Dallas, you lose to Vancouver. In the games since that January 18th match or January 16th matchup against the Calgary Flames, the Blues are the second worst team in the National Hockey League in terms of point percentage. They've given up the second most goals in the National Hockey League, and they've scored the second fewest goals in the National Hockey League.
It's like the inverse of what they were early on under Jim Montgomery.
Totally.
Where it's like, hey, in every statistical category, this is a top 7 to 10 team in the NHL.
Totally.
And since then, they've been a bottom 10 team in basically every statistical category, especially defensively. And this is what's weird, Alex. And I think it all starts, as Jim Montgomery has said, in their offensive zone. They're just not in it very much. They're giving up too many chances. They're giving up high-grade chances. Their goaltending has not been up to snuff, especially on the penalty kill, where I believe it's over the last 5 games they've given up 12 shots on the PK, and they've given up 6 goals on those 12 shots on the PK. That can't happen. Your best penalty killer has to be your goalie, and it's been their worst penalty killer over the last 5 games. When they've needed these guys to step up, not just Benner, not just Hofer, but everybody, all of the best players on this team, they have not been good enough.
Yeah. You've given up, I think it's 7 goals this season in the first minute to start a game. You've given up 7 goals on the first shot by the opponent this season. And under Jim Montgomery, this stat was wild that Curbs gave us last night. Under Jim Montgomery, the Blues are now 0-11-1 when they trail after the first period. They were 4, I got to pull it up. They were 4-6-3, I believe, under Drew Bannister. So to me, I'm throwing all of these at you right now, which seems like I'm just throwing a ton of stats. I'm throwing this all to you because it feels like this team is once again mentally fragile. They're once again to the point that when a snowball starts, they don't know how to stop that before it builds it up and swallows them whole. And unfortunately for this Blues team right now, the words don't matter. You're hearing everybody say, we've got to have better starts. We've got to be engaged in the game. We've got to make sure that we're mentally strong enough to go out there and compete against the opponent. Well, I mean, the opponents that they went up against, yeah, they're tough in terms of who they are when you look at the standings.
This is supposed to be your peers.
Well, and when Vegas came in, when you beat Vegas, they were in the middle of a 3-game losing streak. Their coach was saying that we're not playing right now. Dallas came in off of probably one of the biggest games that they had played this season that they had to win in regulation late against Vegas. They played their backup goaltender who had an .869 save percentage, and you couldn't score a goal on him. You had 8 shots on goal in the first 2 periods. Your home schedule went 0-3 in this stretch. That was Vegas, Dallas, and Vancouver. And then the biggest game probably of that homestand was against Vancouver, who sat 2 points ahead of you. And what happened? You laid an egg again.
And in that game against Dallas, you had the Hall of Famers out there. Had a couple of them that announced the starting lineup to the team inside of the locker room, and then they looked dead, lifeless completely.
Wayne Babbitt looked at the team and said, let's go out there and effing do it. Like, what else do you need to have said to you?
And they went out there and looked lifeless for the first period. And then against Vancouver, they looked lifeless once again, despite Braden Shen, 3 minutes into the game, dropping the gloves against JT Miller. What more do you need, man? You got the playoffs on the line. You got the deadline coming up. You're in this home stretch. You're going to have 2 weeks off very soon. You have to sprint through the finish line. And instead, they decided, you know what? Mission accomplished. We got those 4 points against Calgary. We're good here. It's like, what? It's not only, Alex, that they can't deal with failure, which appears to be a problem within these games. It's also that they really struggle to deal with success. I think that's the more concerning thing to me. Because when they win 2 games in a row, they're like, okay,
we got this. We're good.
We don't need to work quite as hard for this 3rd game. We got those 2. Even if we slip up here, we'll be all right. So it's dealing with failure in game. It's also dealing with success in reading their own press clippings where they get too high on themselves. That's not a recipe for success. And if this was a one-off, if this was a team that had a lot of success last year, and this was just a weird season where a lot went wrong, whatever, okay, you could deal with that. Dude, this is not new.
Yeah.
These are the same players that have dealt with similar issues for 3 years under 3 different coaches at this point.
Well, and I was listening to Chris Pronger on TMA earlier today, and they had asked him, because he was on the Canadian Amazon Prime broadcast last night, and he was talking about how it looks like a team that isn't on the same page. It looks like a team that you've got, I'm going to go back to a phrase that Doug Armstrong used back in the 2018-2019 season. It looks like you got a bunch of individual contractors that are trying to do something to help this team get over the threshold, and you've got guys that are on different wavelengths. You've got guys that are pinching at the blue line and the others that are trying to keep the play alive, and next thing you know, you got two-man rushes the other direction. And we talked about it on Friday, the bad body language of your top players, guys like Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich. And I don't know if we have this audio.
Yeah, let's go to Cam Fowler, who talked about that on the bench. They've got some really bad body language right now. And Cam Fowler, who's a longtime veteran in this league, talked about that after the game last night.
There's talk about being positive, lifting each other up. We talk a lot about the bench needs to be a place where we're supporting one another, and I think we're all competitors, and there's frustration that sets in sometimes, and we've all been in those moments where the body language doesn't look good, so we go through it together as a team, but there's a lot of that just comes with frustration right now, which all of us are feeling, so we have to own that, dig ourselves out of it, but if it starts creeping into the team, that's when it becomes a problem. So we have to address that right away and just know that there's going to be hard parts during a season, during a game, and we have to collectively kind of help one another dig ourselves out of it.
So I'm going to Tuesday morning quarterback this one, just hearing what Cam Fowler is saying. But to me, after we discussed this on Friday, you're having guys that are getting frustrated when plays don't work on the ice and are coming back to the bench and letting that frustration out. And a lot of this is just you're losing. Like, this is what pro athletes do. Sure. Everybody has tendencies when things go bad, you get angry. But what Cam Fowler is saying there, and I thought Cam Fowler was the perfect person to talk about that because he's been dealing with this for the last 5 years with the Anaheim Ducks, like being the worst team in the NHL. But when we talked about Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich and the bad body language on Friday, play doesn't happen. You go back to the bench. You smack your stick on the board. You start yelling at coaches, players, because you're frustrated the play didn't work. And then the next shift, guys are on eggshells. And then the next shift, guys are on eggshells. And then you got guys that are trying to do too much. And all of this throw into the crackpot of throw in a little dynamite onto this. You're trailing in this game. I don't know. I just said like 17 words.
Crackpot? I thought you meant crockpot.
Crackpot.
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 Okay. I think that's something a little different. But yeah,
I'm from Jefferson County. It's fine. I live there. I can say that. You're throwing dynamite into all of this of not being on the same page, being frustrated with your line mates, frustrated with the coaches because things aren't going well. And guess what? You're trailing by 1 or 2 goals because 2 mistakes are finding the back of the net. It's a disaster right now.
We got to talk about that a little bit further. So we're going to get into that coming up on the other side. Jim Montgomery also had some quotes yesterday that I think we need to react to on what he's seen since those Calgary wins. Want to hear from you as well throughout the day today. 314-399-9646. That's the Air Comfort Service text line. You can get involved on the YouTube chat at youtube.com/101ESPN-STL. And you can send in a Scott Lee Heating mic drop as well on the 101 ESPN app. The 101 ESPN app is free to enjoy for you guys. It's super easy to use. If you want to get your thoughts on the St. Louis Blues, where they're at today, and what needs to be done in order for this team to get back to contention, not just this season, but long-term, get those in on the Scott Lee Heating mic drop feature on the 101 ESPN app. Coming up next, how does this get fixed? Is it a personnel issue? Is it something where they just need to fix the locker room? Is this something that can be fixed with just Dvorsky and Snuggerud being added to the mix? We'll get into that next year on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646. That's the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. Alex, I want to hear from Jim Montgomery, because after the game last night, he sounded like somebody kicked his dog. He looked...
Damn, man.
I mean, can we be honest?
Could you at least say cat?
Sure, it looks like somebody kicked his cat, I suppose.
Okay.
I don't know if you would have been as sad in that scenario, but that's another conversation for another day.
Dog guys,
I apologize. I didn't mean it. Jim Montgomery, after the game, was asked about what he's seen from the Blues since their 2 games against Calgary, where the team played really well. They've since lost 4 of their last 5. Here's Monty.
Common theme that I have seen is a lack of energy, that of playing to what we can do. That's been the common. It's been a week here where I don't know if it's a malaise, and that's my fault. I have to get the group to engage more and to be, I don't want to say prepared, because it's not prepared. It's having the attitude of we're going to do this. And it's not there right now. And, if it's not there in the entire group, that's where I have to look at myself and I have to look in the mirror and what do I have to do different to get them to battle through adversity, to battle through all this. We're not overcoming it within the game right now.
Alex, in this stretch, here are some plus minuses for the St. Louis Blues. Pavel Buchnevich, -6. Jake Neighbors, -5. Braden Shin, -4. Robert Thomas, -4. Those are supposed to be your top players. Now, I didn't mention Jordan Kyrou. Kyrou's actually been good. He's a +1. Weird, the whipping boy is suddenly now the guy that you look at, you're like, why can't everybody play the way that Jordan Kyrou does? But I digress.
Give it time. Someone will find a reason why not to like it.
Alex, this is another coach saying the same thing, and it's the same players that are coming up once again. And so my question to you, are we trying to just do the definition of insanity here, where it's like the same things over and over and over again? Eventually got to be like, hey, the simplest solution is this might be a player issue. Or is there something else? Is it a personnel issue? Is it we had too high of expectations issues for this team? What are you seeing here, Alex?
Well, I mean, let's go through this piece by piece, because personnel issue, I'm sure you can sit there and there are people on our Air Comfort Service text line that are complaining about Steve Ott as the power play and the penalty kill coach. And they're saying, well, you need a different person in charge of that. He hasn't been good for the last 3 years. Okay, but you have had different people working on the power play and penalty kill. Remember Craig McTavish? Craig McTavish was in charge of it, and he lost his job, and Steve Ott took it over. Mark Savard, who was here for a little bit, I think it was following the Blue Stanley Cup championship, if not the year after that, he was on it, and the power play was fine. It's hard for me to sit there and point fingers at the power play being a problem when it's like 16th in the NHL since January 18th, and your even strength numbers have been awful. Now you go to the penalty kill. Well, it's a penalty kill problem. Sure, fine. But why can I blame the coach who was the coach of the penalty kill 4 years ago when you had some of the same guys on it and they were still having, and they're having these same issues right now? So it's hard for me to point at that. When you look at the way that the team has been playing, you go from this month of December and how they were performing on the ice. They were aggressive from the jump. They were forcing teams into their own zone. They weren't making mistakes in terms of odd man rushes. Now look at from January 18th on. It's been odd man rush after odd man rush after odd man rush. It's been turnovers in the offensive zone. It's been lackadaisical in the neutral zone. I go back to that 2018-2019 season when Mike Yeo was fired and Craig Berube took over. And Doug Armstrong held a press conference at the Mills. I was sitting in attendance, and Doug Armstrong was pissed. And one of the first things out of his mouth was, I've done this way too many times, speaking of firing the head coach, and I'm not doing this again because we are hiring Craig Berube as our head coach, and moving forward, if there's issues with this team, the players will be looked at. He used the word individual contractors an awful lot. And Craig Berube, everybody remembers that press conference where he talked about this team does not have enough confidence in themselves. We've got to make them more confident in themselves so that they can bring that onto the ice. And remember, that didn't get fixed until like the end of January when they started to perform better, and then they went on that 11-game win streak. It's hard to point at anything else. You fired 3 coaches. You've had different assistant coaches over the last few years. You've had different players coming in and out in terms of complementary roles. But the common denominator has been your top guys. Since Ryan O'Reilly and Vladimir Tarasenko, David Perron, they've all moved on. It's been the Thomases, it's been the Kyrous, it's been the Buchneviches, it's been the Schens, the Parekos, the Falks, the Binningtons. Those are the guys. And it's hard to look at a trend for 3 years when it has been the common denominator of slow starts, not enough energy, not good for 60 minutes, and point at something else and say, that's the problem. To me, that's why they brought in Jim Montgomery. You brought in Jim Montgomery because it's a head coach who's got a career .600 winning percentage in the National Hockey League. He's won a championship in college. He's been to a Stanley Cup final in the National, no, not Stanley Cup final, but he's been in the Stanley Cup playoffs every single year in the National Hockey League. It's hard to point a finger at the coach and say that's the problem. I think where the Blues are at right now is it's a look in your mirror moment and find out, do your top players want to take this team to the next level?
All right, I would like to do a little something with you real quick. I just put together a list of players that I think are performing above expectations, at expectations, and below expectations relative to what we thought they would be coming into the season. Alex, I have my list. I'm curious if you would disagree on any of these. For my above expectations, players that have been better than I thought they would be coming into the season. Jordan Kyrou, I think, has been better overall, even though the goal scoring is probably right about where you expected it to be when you look at these full season numbers. I think overall, though, his 200-foot game, he's a better player today than I necessarily expected him to be. Dylan Holloway, 100% on that list. He would probably be number one on that list. I think Colton Parayko, the guy is getting ready to set new career highs in points, goals. Like I think he's been amazing. And then I would say Ryan Suter. I expected very little out of him this year. He's been a really solid defenseman. Not capable of being a number one defenseman, but that never should have been the expectation. I would say those four players to me have outperformed what I thought they would be coming into the season. Do you agree with that list?
Yeah, I don't think
Kyrou, Holloway, Parayko, Suter.
Yeah, I don't think I would put. I think I would put Braden Shen on there.
So I have for him the entire season at expectations. Braden Shen right now is on pace this season based on his full year performance for 18 goals and 47 points. I think that was a realistic expectation so 20 goals, for him. Okay. And then a -6 on the plus-minus for the season.
Yeah. Okay.
That feels about what we kind of expected. It was a really bad start. It's been really good since. Yeah. But on the whole, pretty much what I thought he was going to be.
I don't really think anybody else kind of falls into the criteria of above from what my expectations were, other than the guys that you just referenced.
All right, the guys at expectations for me is a much longer list. One of them is Braden Shen, as you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. I would say Jake Neighbors is pretty much at my expectations. He's certainly not above. I think he's closer to below than.
Yeah, I would put him at below, unfortunately. And I love Jake Neighbors. I think he plays with some of the most heart on this team. But 13 goals in 51 games after a 27-goal season, I expected a lot more net front presence from him.
This is where we had differing expectations coming into the season, so it plays into this. I thought he was a 20 to 25-goal scorer. I think last year there was a little bit of puck luck with him, and there's going to be some variance when you are that type of a player that really just stands in front of the net. If he ends up being a 45-point producer with 20-plus goals per year, I think that's a really nice player. That's a good outcome for the Blues. So I would have him here, but I understand the case against it if you had higher expectations. I know people are going to disagree with this next one. I would say Bolduc is pretty much what I expected him to be. The playing time isn't there, but if you look at how he's produced when he's been on the ice, I think he's pretty much the player that I thought he would be at this point in his career.
I agree with that statement.
Broberg, overall, got off to an amazing start. I think it's been a little bit of a dip in his play lately. Kind of what I expected.
Yeah, well, and I think the injuries have taken a toll on that one. I mean, I could hear the argument for outperforming what the expectations were for how little we knew about him, but I think for how it's dipped a little bit, I'll say it's right.
24 points.
I'll say he's right at expectations.
Fowler, I think, at expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Walker, Fox, Toropchenko, at expectations for me.
I would actually put Toropchenko below expectations.
Okay.
I think you had back-to-back seasons with double-digit goals. Lou Korek and I had this conversation yesterday.
Totally fair.
You had back-to-back seasons of 10 and 14 goals. Now, I'm not saying I expect him to be a double-digit goal every single season, but you've got one goal through 51 games.
All right, and then the last player that I have on this list is Joseph. I think he's been at expectations.
Yeah, I think he's been expected what I thought.
Now, this is where it gets interesting. So you've got Torpo on the bottom list. Guys that I have as below expectations this season. Let's start out with the easy ones. Texier, Sonny. And you've got Toropchenko on there as well.
Yeah.
Beyond that, this is where your season has gone downhill. Saad has been below expectations. Falk has been below expectations. Buchnevich has been well below expectations. And I think Robert Thomas, after what I thought was a pretty good start for him, especially coming back from the injury, He's been below expectations. And that's where things have gone sideways for this team, man. It really comes down to Thomas and Buchnevich. If those guys were playing at their career norms, because they're supposed to be your top line players, they're supposed to be your 200-foot contributors. If they were playing at their career expectations and what we thought they would be coming into the season, why they were paid $8 million apiece, those guys combined make $16 million starting next year against the cap. That is a quarter of what the Blues have available. It's like 20% of the Blues' overall cap is going to those two players. If they're not going to raise the game for everybody that plays with them, this team can't win, can't succeed as currently constructed.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem for the Blues.
You're absolutely right. Like, when you look at who the guys are, and it's wild to say with Robert Thomas, because December he was the third best player in the National Hockey League. But why is this team's play dipped in January? Because of what BK just referenced for you.
I forgot to mention two others. I didn't mention the goalies. Both of them would be below expectations.
Yeah. Well, considering one of my Ferrario fives was that would be one of the best tandems in the National Hockey League, they haven't lived up to the expectation on that one. I've been trying to make a reference all day today since we started our conversation in the office of like, okay, what teams have been through this before? Because like the LA Kings comp that Doug Armstrong has used, they didn't make any changes to their leadership. Frankly, they just were bad for a couple of years. But it was Ajay Kopitar, it was Drew Doughty, and it was Dustin Brown until Dustin Brown retired. And that never changed for them. You know, the one that came to mind was the Minnesota Wild. They didn't like their leadership and Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, and they said, you guys are overpaid and we need to move out. But those teams made the playoffs almost every single season that Suter and Parise were a part of that team. So it's hard to point to that. This is just why it's so odd right now, because you've got a group of guys that Doug Armstrong has looked at and they said, this is a group that is the next wave for our Blues team. And they haven't been able to take this bull by the horns and run with it yet. And it starts with the guys that are playing 20 minutes a night. If you're frustrated where this Blues team is at because Alexei Toropchenko's only got one goal, or Nathan Walker's not, or Zach Bolduc's playing 12 minutes a night, well, then there's a lot more issues than a team than worrying about those guys. The frustration comes from the guys that are playing the most minutes, the power play, the penalty kill, 5-on-5 late in games. And honestly, the comp you brought up in the office is the one that's probably most similar. It was back in that 2011-2012 stretch when they had Berglund, Perron, and Oshie. Those were the next guys, and what happened? Oshie was moved because they couldn't get over the hump. Perron was moved because he wasn't living up to expectations, and eventually Patrick Berglund was moved because he didn't live up there. Now, by no means am I saying that you're going to get to the point where you start trading guys away, but go back to the 2018-19 I referenced at the beginning of this segment. Doug Armstrong made it very clear. Friedman had the report on 32 Thoughts back then. Basically, Doug Armstrong in the middle of that season called every team and said, hey, we got a fire sale going on with our team because everybody isn't playing well.
If you've got a Christmas wish list, we are a one-stop shop.
And that was,
we've got everything available.
And that was Pietrangelo, that was Ryan O'Reilly, that was Vladimir Tarasenko, that was Braden Shen. Like, that was everybody. And if that team was putting everybody in front of the NHL saying they aren't performing well and this is why our team is struggling, you have to look at this team and say the exact same thing.
I think the most difficult place to be as a general manager or a front office executive is when you have a player that you have invested in, first with the draft and then with their literal development, and eventually you get to the other side of that and you see, oh, this guy's got star potential. And so you keep investing in them. That's money, that's time, that's coaching. It's all of these different things, right? And that's what they've done with Robert Thomas, for example. And the toughest place to be, in my opinion, as a front office executive is when you think that guy is on the cusp of taking that step into stardom, and instead they stagnate as a good player. And that's my fear right now with Thomas. My fear is he's just a really good player. Now, that's not a bad outcome, necessarily. If you had drafted him and I told you 7 years ago, hey, Robert Thomas is going to end up being a consistent 70-point producer who can be a second-line center on a contending team, I think most of us would have signed up for that 7 years ago. But that is no longer what he was sold as. Now the expectations have changed, and they need Robert Thomas to be a point-per-game player that is a 200-foot guy that ends up as a number one center on a contender. And I think the fear for me, and I would guess the fear for a lot of Blues fans is, what if he can't be that? What if that's asking too much of him? What if Buchnevich at this point in his career is actually not going to take that next step? He's not a 30-plus goal scorer. He's a 25-goal scorer, and he's a decent 200-foot player, but it's actually taken a little bit of a step back because now he's 30 instead of being 27 when he got here. And now you've invested in two guys that at really their best are probably second-line players on legit Stanley Cup contenders. And I think Jordan Kyrou, who I love and I'm higher on than most here in St. Louis, is probably that. And I think Dylan Holloway, who I love, has the potential to be a top-line winger, but he's probably the third guy on a top line, not one of the two pairs, one of the guys that's like originally paired as that, and then you kind of switch up the third player. What the Blues might be lacking is, once again, one of the hardest things to find in the sport, which is a number one center and a number one winger. They have seemingly the rest of the lineup kind of filled out now, and I don't know that they have anybody coming through the pipeline. I would bet against it. That profiles as being those two players. So if they ended up being wrong on Thomas and Booch as being prepared to be those guys, that begs some serious questions both at this year's trade deadline and more likely in the offseason of what's that future outlook then? How do you pivot? Is there a pivot? Can you pivot? And those are questions that I'm going to be really curious about. I don't know that they'll be asked necessarily today at the press conference, availability for Doug Armstrong, but that is what's in front of the St. Louis Blues right now.
I just to the other flip of the coin with this one, because I know so many people, I've seen it already on the text line. I've been tweeted it as well. This team should have gone into a full rebuild and not got the 10th overall pick and 16th overall pick.
They couldn't.
Well, also, you're seeing what Joe Vitale has warned us about. And this is a team that has had little losing. Joey has said multiple times, once you get the stink of losing in a locker room, you don't get it out. And you've had 2 seasons of it. Now 3, depending on what this one looks like. Imagine what a rebuild looks like. That stink is even harder to get out of the locker room. So when you bank on certain players to take that role, there is a learning curve that comes to it. But, man, I'm at the point now where I can't hear well, he's young and he's still learning, because you've been in the league long enough to where you have to recognize that the losing has been taking place for 2 years. And I remember Robert Thomas at the end of the season last year saying, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of missing the playoffs. For a guy who had been in the playoffs all the way from junior hockey to his first year in the NHL, and then the next 2, he said, I'm sick of missing the playoffs. You're not seeing it in the middle of the season when it matters most.
Also, this team just isn't, they're not set up to tank. They have too many good players. And I know that sounds strange because we're talking right now about how they lack those top-line players, and I believe that. But they have too many solid players to truly go through a tank. That would have required selling off Parayko and selling off Bennington and selling off Thomas and Kyrou. And trust me when I say nobody wants that. That is a team that is unwatchable, and for 5 years continues to be unwatchable. Yeah. And you never know if that cycle is going to end. That's what Detroit did. You guys want to sign up for that? Because that sucks, dude. That team's terrible, and they've been bad now for almost a decade. All right, last thing here, Alex, before we get out of here. We got to get into some NFL quick hitters on the other side. We've already gone very long. Luke Horak is saying that at practice today, he is not seeing Pavel Buchnevich or Brandon Saad.
Start the speculation.
Maintenance day?
Probably.
Okay.
Well, for one of those. The other, I'm going to be really curious. I mean, let's be honest. Brandon Saad, I don't know if there's been enough for maintenance day. Now, maybe he is dealing with something that I don't know about, but that one I'm a little more surprised by than the Buchnevich one. The Buch one doesn't. Maybe he is dealing with something, and that's what we've seen.
It would explain a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it would totally explain a lot, but the Brandon Saad one's a little surprising.
Coming up in 15 minutes, we'll get into questions and answers. Next is NFL Quick Hitters here at 101 ESPN.
I'm Alex Ferrario with your Sports Center update as the Blues fall last night to the Vancouver Canucks 5-2. Their first three-game losing streak, all in regulation under Jim Montgomery, now sitting at 1 game below 500. The Blues practicing today out at Centene Community Ice Center. No line rushes as of yet, but Doug Armstrong, president of hockey operations, expected to talk to the media in about 15 minutes or so. The Sports Center update brought to you by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Are you kidding me?
That's a great update, Alex.
Thanks,
Appreciate
man.
you doing that.
I haven't done that in 3 years. Remember when I was just throwing random stuff into there when it was Rivs and BK?
That's
and
great.
I tried to just see if I could get Jamie to laugh.
Remember Andy Dalton?
Yeah, I remember Andy Dalton. Look, man, we've all had some dark times in our careers.
Yeah.
That was probably one of my darkest.
The worst moment on radio is when you just blank. And you're like, I need this word that's about to come out, but you can't find it. You don't know what the word is. For whatever reason, it's just lost in your memory bank. Yep. And then instead of saying something else, instead of just moving on to the next thing, you just freeze.
Yep.
And it's as if time stops, and it's the most horrifying and brutal experience in the world.
The brain was trying to catch up, and for people that can see on our YouTube channel, the shaded screen wasn't here when the Andy Dalton thing happened, and Mike Ryder, our executive producer, was sitting in this room. He and I locked eyes with each other for a good 10 seconds, and Ryder was looking at me trying to figure out what was going on in my head. I was trying to figure out if I should just dump this whole Sports Center update, and then he, in my ear, goes, Andy Dalton. I'm like, thank you. Andy Dalton.
That's an all-time great moment.
Let's break this one up real quick.
All right, let's get into some NFL quick hitters. We'll do this quickly. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers in about 10 minutes. But, Alex, yesterday, Brian Schottenheimer was, I guess, announced as the Cowboys' next head coach.
And the second worst press conference we have seen so far in the NFL offseason.
If you haven't seen the press conference, Jerry Jones was up there, and I'm not sure how to describe this other than to say he clearly didn't want to hire Brian Schottenheimer as the next head coach of the Cowboys.
The best way that I described it to my dad was Jerry Jones geriatrically meandered for about an hour and a half through answers.
What happened? Did he want somebody else, and then he decided, hey, we're not getting that guy, and so our only pivot is the guy that just happens to be down the hall? Like, he got told no, and so then he was like, hey, who wants to be the head coach around here? And Shotty was looking around, and he's like, well, you fired everybody else, so I guess I'll take it.
In. And
he just got offered the position?
Did you ever have this, BK, when you were dating in high school or college before you met your wife, to where you think you got a good game, and you walk up to the girl, and then you just start destroying yourself, and you just start knocking yourself down one after the other. You think you're pumping yourself up. You're like, man, this has gotten bad. And then you just slowly step away and be like, I'm going to back out of this room. That's what took place in that press conference with Brian Schottenheimer.
I had a girl I was dating in high school. Her name was Haley. And I thought things were going really well. Things seemed to be heading down the right direction. And one of her best friends was also one of my really good friends. Just like different friend groups, and we met through this person. And then her friend told me, she's like, hey, everything good with Haley? I was like, I mean, I think so.
Hell yeah. Are you kidding me? Look at this.
It became very clear very quickly. I had a relationship with Haley like Jerry Jones currently has Brian Schottenheimer, where it's like, hey, one of these people is far more interested in the other.
Totally.
And that's what this feels like. I don't know what the future's going to hold for Shotty as a head coach at the Cowboys. I have no idea if this will work because, man, it's a crapshoot. Yeah. Sometimes the best hires end up being absolute disasters, and the things that you think are the worst hires, Sirianni, who talked about the flowers.
Oh, yeah, that one was a bad one.
Growth and everything. We're
T-Bone and I still remember that.
Bleep. And he ends up being apparently a great hire, going to 2 Super Bowls in the next 5 years. I don't know, man.
I'll give you my tinfoil. This was just Jerry Jones trying to to create a runway for Jason Witten to take over next year. He's going to have one. Here's Brian Schottenheimer, ladies and gentlemen. I have no clue if this dude's going to be good. Frankly, it's probably not going to be good. But he's here. He's our guy. And then all of this upcoming season, it's going to be, are you kidding me? Look at the offense that Jason Witten's putting together. This guy is incredible. And then, boom, there's your next head coach.
All right, so that was the biggest update yesterday. For those curious what's going on with the Detroit Lions, they've decided to hire their linebackers coach to be their next defensive coordinator, so they're going internal there. And they have hired John Morton as their next offensive coordinator.
Okay.
Broncos assistant coach.
Oh, there it is.
He has a connection with Dan Campbell through their days with the Saints. They had both worked under Sean Payton down with the New Orleans Saints. So John Morton is the next offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. That's what we got.
I mean, I guess I like the fact that he was the passing game coordinator for a Broncos team that looked good under.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully it works. I don't know, man. I always have concerns when you have to replace two coordinators because even if you get one of them right, the other one could potentially go horribly wrong. And it's so hard to know if this is going to work out or not. I wouldn't have expected Ben Johnson to be what he ended up becoming. So it's possible they got this 100% right, and he's going to be a superstar head coach one day. Who knows? Who knows? But that's what we got as our NFL Quick Hitters today. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Questions and answers coming up next. Alongside Alex and T-Bone on BK, a little bit of news pass along. This comes from John Orand of the Sports Business Journal. Bills-Chiefs championship game averaged 58 million viewers, making it the most watched AFC championship game dating back to at least 1988. My guess is, based on the language, that's as far back as these records go. It is the second most watched non-Super Bowl game behind only the NFC championship game between the Vikings and Saints on Fox back in 2010. So a massive viewership for Bills versus Chiefs, to say the least. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers from the 314. Guys, I asked a few weeks ago, but I'll ask it again. Do you think that the Cardinals are really going to make no transactions all winter? And I do not count signing Goldie allowing Goldie and Kittredge to go as moves. Okay, sorry, that was confusing there at the end. Let me say the question just to make it very clear. Do you believe that the Cardinals will make a transaction at some point this offseason?
No, I do not. I don't think they're going to make one. I think you are looking at their team for the upcoming season.
I think they will end up trading Nolan Arenado, and I think it will happen after the Houston Astros sign Alex Bregman. I think that is the way that things are headed. I think Bregman believed he had one market and saw in reality that he very much did not have that. And I think the Astros are ultimately probably pretty happy that they didn't end up trading for Arenado, because in their heart of hearts, I think they'd rather have Bregman. Better for the clubhouse. That's a guy that's been there. He gets along with the guys really well. And I think you can just expect better production as well for the immediate future, even if long-term you might have a similar kind of decline. So I think they do end up trading Nolan Arenado, and that'll be their main move for the offseason. From the 618, guys, what are realistic expectations for Chicago in year one under Ben Johnson? 10-7?
Yeah, I was going to say 9 or 10 wins. I would say, I don't know if you're, frankly, in the NFC, I think you can be a playoff team, but you got a lot to deal with in your own division. But I think expectations 9 or 10 wins. That offense is set up for Ben Johnson to have success. Invest in the offensive line in the draft and through free agency. Maybe get a nice piece on your defense to make it that much better. You got the players in place, and now it's just a matter of, is Ben Johnson a good enough coach?
From the 217, guys, if Booch, Sod, and a pick were available for the Blues, do you think that would be enough to get JT Miller? Booch, Sod, and a pick for JT Miller. Would you consider that, Alex, if you were in the Blues' shoes?
So let me answer the first one. I think it would be enough. Frankly, I think it might be too much to get JT Miller, just because Pavel Buchnevich is a year younger. He's locked up longer. And in my opinion, he's a better player. Just haven't seen it this year. I don't think I would do that, though. I understand right now it's alarm bells going off and this looks awful, but man, JT Miller would not be the guy that I think is going to change the culture of this Blues team. There's a reason JT Miller's been on 3 different teams. I understand he's a hard worker. I understand he's a hell of a player and has put up close to 100 points. But there's a reason why he's gone from the Rangers to Tampa to Vancouver and now is potentially going to get traded to his 4th team.
We said the same thing about Ryan Suter, though, right? And now that we've actually seen Ryan Suter,
a lot of people said it.
Right.
Yeah.
But
see, Suter's was different. Suter got bought out twice.
I mean, that's even worse.
Well, totally. But Suter also, I don't know. I look at this as a little different because Suter, when he got bought out from Minnesota, it was a new GM that took over and said, I want to start this thing differently. And he did. And when he was bought out from Dallas, Dallas said, we need cap space, and we don't think he's going to help us right now.
That was the Tampa situation, though, for Miller.
Maybe, but, man, JT Miller was a really good player for the New York Rangers when they were trying to compete. And then you traded that guy away.
I mean, the Rangers trade away a lot of good players. That's what I've
You're not wrong there.
5 years.
You're not wrong there. But Vancouver, he's coming off of a 100-point season. And he's 31 years old.
Yeah.
I could say the same thing for Elias Pettersson.
In a serious way this year.
We did say the same thing about Ryan Suter. And you know what? I could be totally wrong with this one. But he wasn't a part of a Tampa Bay Lightning team when they won their cups. He got traded away from New York when he was one of their best players. And in Vancouver, he's got 100 points last year. And now they're trying to move him again.
So when I hear this stuff about, hey, prickly personality, I sometimes wonder, are the guys in the locker room soft?
Well, yeah.
And like, I don't say that to be crap. I think we've seen it with Suter. Yeah, I can understand how his personality can rub some people the wrong way. I also understand how you need that personality inside of your locker room. And sometimes people aren't going to respond well to it, and that might be more on them than it is on him.
Well, and so there's to me, there's the answer. If it is other players that can't handle the prickly attitude, do you want to add that person to your locker room if you've got guys who can't handle it? Yeah, but if your best players can't handle it, do you want to add more of those guys to it?
Then get rid of the best players. I don't know if that's the answer, but I think we're getting close to that being a question that at least needs to be asked. And to answer the question directly, I would not do this. I don't think JT Miller is the guy that I would be targeting. That being said, I think a lot of this comes back to the question of what's their plan with Buch? How do they view the outlook for Pavel Buchnevich? Because if they think this is maybe injury related or just a down season because of the center situation or whatever it might be, if they think Buch is going to get back to the player that he was, then you keep him and you move on long term and you go through this thing together and you live with it. But if they have as many questions internally as we do externally about, hey, is this going to work? Is this going to be a problem for you? Then you have to start looking at, okay, what are the alternatives here? Yeah. What can we do to get out of this situation? And that has to be done prior to July 1st. So that's got to happen sooner rather than later. In the next 6 months, 5 months, I guess, at this point, you got to find an answer for Pavel Buchnevich. So it's at least a question that has to be discussed internally. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Coming up next, there was a ranking, Alex, by a former Major League Baseball general manager yesterday on who has had the best offseason in the sport. Obviously, that goes to the LA Dodgers. Beyond that, who would be your answer? I want to hear from the text line. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Outside of the Dodgers, who to you has had the best offseason in Major League Baseball? The answer might surprise you from this former Major League Baseball general manager, and I think it speaks to a problem that baseball has right now. And we'll get to that next year on 101 ESPN. Such a big 12 o'clock hour.
I
Coming
know.
back with the Open. Alex Ferrario in with Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. T-Bone tried to play hurt. He couldn't do it.
I don't blame him, man. That dude looked rough.
He did not look good. I don't think it's related to the intoxication on Sunday. I do think this is an actual. He's just not feeling great.
I think the intoxication just made it worse than what it was.
He's getting out of here. Alex going to take over on the board for us. We're going to have Jordan Deacon come in with us in just a little while. She is right now out at the media availability with Doug Armstrong. We can't play that live. It's not being carried live anywhere. So we'll get all of the updates for you from that as soon as we get them from the Blues morning skate. Doug Armstrong, Blues president of hockey operations, meeting with the media there today. But I did want to talk a little bit about something I saw yesterday. This comes from Dan O'Dowd, former Major League Baseball general manager, who on MLB Network yesterday put together his list of the most impressive off seasons in the league. Now, he didn't include the Dodgers because
they are the most impressive offseason in major leagues.
They are the answer to every question. At number one on his list was the Cincinnati Reds. Now, the Reds have hired Terry Francona. They traded for Brady Singer, and they traded for Gavin Lux. It's like a number 3 starter, a decent middle infielder, and Hall of Fame manager.
Yeah.
That's nice. He believes that's the best offseason that any non-Dodgers team had so far. Others that he has on the list, the Red Sox adding Garrett Crochet, Walker Buehler, Aroldis Chapman. That's actually a really impressive offseason. The Cubs with Kyle Tucker, Ryan Presley hasn't officially been announced, but it's likely to happen. The Diamondbacks adding Corbin Burns, but they did lose Christian Walker and Jock Peterson. So those are, in his mind, the 4 best offseasons other than the Dodgers. Alex, to me, I would just have the Mets because they added Juan Bleepin Soto. That's a pretty good offseason in my mind.
The Reds are behind all of those teams. Like everything that you just read off to me, the Reds are behind every one of those teams.
Sure. Regardless of who we think is number one beyond the Dodgers, I think it speaks to a problem that Major League Baseball has right now.
Yeah.
Those offseasons suck. Like if those are the best ones in Major League Baseball this offseason, then it's been a terrible offseason for the sport. And you look out there and who's still available, it's like, man, okay, so Jack Flaherty is still out there today. Pete Alonso still available today. Alex Bregman still available today. Luis Castillo has not been traded. Dylan Cease has not been traded. Nolan Arenado has not been traded. The guys that we talked about on the first day of the offseason as, hey, these are the marquee free agent / trade additions. The only guys that have actually moved teams among that list, Soto, Fried, Burns, Adames, and Blake Snell. That's it. Everybody else is basically still out there that was available the first day that the offseason begins. I don't know what baseball can do to fix this, but something has got to be done to fix this because right now, the way that they're doing things, teams have no deadlines and they feel no motivation to get these moves done prior to the start of spring training. They're like, if this thing drags into spring training, then we have the leverage and the player doesn't because the player needs to get there. But then it impacts the team because the player doesn't perform the way that he would if he was at the entirety of spring training. And we know how these guys are. They want to know where they're going to be because they want to know where spring training is going to be because they're there for a month and a half with their families. And then they want to know, where they're going to live for the next year for a lot of them. But for some of them, the next 5 to 7 years. The way that baseball is operating right now in the offseason, it used to be a strength where they were in the headlines for 6 to 8 weeks, and then you'd typically know where most of the guys were headed. You'd have a couple of stragglers, but typically by like mid-January, certainly by now, you would have a pretty good idea where basically all of the headline guys were going to be. That's no longer the case, and I think in the next CBA negotiations, I know players will push back against it because they have to, I suppose. This is actually something that could be good for the players and the owners. And there's got to be something done where we come to an agreement of, hey, by Christmas Day, can we have a deadline? And then you could start things back up like the first day of spring training. But by Christmas Day, you got to be signed or traded. And then baseball goes like away from the headlines for a month. And then they get back into the headlines when pitchers and catchers report. But to me, this is something that the sport has to deal with.
Yeah, they do. I mean, you talk about the ramifications of what you just mentioned of these guys. not signing or not getting traded. So now the offseason is just diluted and nobody cares about it. Like, you're always anticipating the guy to sign, but you understand that if that guy doesn't sign and if your team doesn't have any interest or have the ability to sign them, i.e. like a Juan Soto, well, guess what? The other dominoes aren't going to fall until that guy goes down. Arenado is a perfect example of this. You're not going to get dealt until Alex Bregman signs. The way to fix this also is the salary cap. And I know that Major League Baseball is not going to do this. Players aren't going to want to do this. And frankly, this is probably what's going to hold up the next CBA negotiations. But let's look at all of the other free agencies in pro sports. NHL, NFL, NBA. It is like scheduled. The first 2 or 3 days of free agency, that first week of free agency, once it hits, all of the big names are off the board. And then it's just kind of a sprinkling of, you get some of the complimentary pieces that sign throughout the rest of the offseason. Some trades take place. But that first week, everybody is locked in because they know what their team is going to look like. And frankly, that is because of the salary cap. Teams want to know where they're at, who they have, how much they have available to them so that they can negotiate trades. They can find ways to upgrade their roster months before the season begins. And what baseball is doing is you're watering down the opportunity for fans to get excited about their team. When Pete Alonso isn't going to sign until the second week of spring training, now my team's already set. I'm kind of already lethargic about him because it's not that interesting. But then let's look at the examples of past when guys don't sign. The first 2 months of their seasons go awful. And then you're like, well, this team blew this signing. Yeah. And then teams become afraid to give guys money in future years. And it's a terrible cycle that just keeps repeating in baseball.
We got this from the 618. Guys, why would baseball willingly go away from the headlines? Isn't that what we praise the NFL for, is always being in the headlines? Can you show me the last Major League Baseball headline from, I would say, the last month or so? Like Ryan Presley getting traded. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of rumors.
Did that make any sort of a dent on the NFL playoff conversations? Because nationally, if you're not a Cubs or an Astros fan or from St. Louis where you care about the Nolan Arenado sweepstakes, nobody's talking about that.
Right.
Nobody. So baseball has already willingly gone away from the headlines. Like, they have done this without actually imposing the deadline. So they have all of the consequences and none of the benefits. Because at least if you have a deadline by, let's say, Christmas, what you have now done is from November, let's call it November, like second week of November, to December 25th, that is your 6-week stretch where transactions take place. And it's guaranteed, if you're a fan, that's when it's happening. The action will take place then. And one of the main benefits there is you're not going up against the NFL's playoff. You're not going up against the college football playoff the way that you are right now. You don't get lost in the headlines the same way. It's the regular season for the NFL and the regular season for college football, sure. But those gain less traction nationally. And it's not the middle of the season trade deadline time for the NBA. Like, there's a lot of stuff that takes place around this point in the sports calendar. If you end it earlier, you actually make more waves. And so I do think it used to be something that could have been a positive for baseball. But like Alex said, you get these other sports, man. July 1st for the NBA and NHL, stuff gets done.
Yep.
If you're an impact free agent, you are off the board typically right as free agency begins. Mm-hmm. But occasionally it takes like 24 hours. Maybe if you're LeBron James, you take 3 days to decide where you're going to go. Yeah. And that's like the rarest of rare occasions. Even some of the big trades, like I remember a few years ago, I was on vacation and Chris Paul suddenly was no longer, I think at the time he was like a Rocket, and suddenly he's on the Clippers or whatever, or the Clippers and he gone to the Rockets. Yeah. This is not happening in baseball anymore. The deals for trades are getting postponed because the free agency market isn't moving. And the free agency market isn't moving because the owners see no need to concede anything on their arguments to these players. So eventually the leverage does go in favor of the owners because the players want to get to where they're going to go. And now we just end up dragging everything out into February. And then a lot of stuff that could have been done just doesn't get done. And teams are just stuck with what they had previously.
Well, in the middle and the bottom of the market for these free agents is just completely dead. And like, what's so funny to me is they call it a players union and how they're out there fighting for every single player in baseball. All of these guys that are bench bats or minor leagues guys that get brought in that have a chance to get to the majors, they're left without a home all the way through spring training because they're waiting for the Pete Alonsos,
Bingo.
the Alex Bregmans, the Jack Flahertys to sign. And guess what? If they don't sign, other teams aren't going to go out there and get the next tier down. They'll just say, well, we'll stick with what we've got internally. So you're killing the market for the middle of the pack and the bottom of the market just for the top level guys. And the top level guys aren't going to get signed because owners don't want to give the money that they're wanting.
Yeah, it's not a good look for the sport,
No.
man. Even John Mozeliak was asked about this at Cardinals winter warm-up a couple of weeks ago, and he basically said, listen, I think something needs to be done. I used to be opposed to it, but now you look at it and, man, normally when you go to winter warm-up, you've got your team pretty much constructed. And this year they have this massive elephant in the room where it's like, hey, what's Nolan Arenado's future? We don't know because we're waiting for Alex Bregman to sign. And normally in the past, Alex Bregman would have signed a month and a half ago. But now with the way that everything's going through these negotiations, that's not happening anymore. I know where players are at on this, and they're just going to reject.
Yep.
And I am, generally speaking, very player-friendly. I think they've lost the plot on this stuff, man. I think we have now arrived at a place where, yes, for Max Scherzer and for Shohei Ohtani and the rarest of the rare exceptions, it's good to not have a cap. It is. It's good for those guys to be able to make $60 million a year and to not have to worry about a team like the Dodgers just blowing through the luxury tax and having a $300 million payroll. They just do not care. So it's good for those guys, the rare exceptions, to not have a salary cap. But for, I would say, 80% of the player base, it's pretty bad to not have a salary cap. And the reason why is because when you have a cap, you also have a floor. Teams are required to spend to a certain level. And you look across Major League Baseball, and there are a lot of teams that are not spending up to whatever that floor would be. The Marlins, $67 million as of today is where their payroll is at. So the Pittsburgh Pirates are 26th right now in Major League Baseball. They have an $83 million payroll. The Cleveland Guardians are 25th, $96 million in payroll going into the season. So you have 6 teams in Major League Baseball that have a payroll this year of less than $100 million. Yeah. That should probably be the floor.
Yeah, and that's where the salary cap comes into play.
And so now you're pulling this up where, okay, suddenly the A's are spending $25 million more. The Pirates are spending $20 million more. You're getting another $25 million from the White Sox. You're getting another $6 to $7 million minimum for all these teams, by the way, from the Cleveland Guardians. Yes, it comes down a little bit from the Mets, from the Dodgers. But these other teams are going to come up such a significant way that I think it actually ends up being a benefit, but the players don't see it.
And you know what happens? More parity in the league because you have more teams that are bringing in Pete Alonsos or Alec Bregmans that create a little bit more excitement for the division in terms of not looking at it and saying, well, this is the only good team in this division this year and everything else is a crapshoot. There's more excitement for baseball rather than sitting around and looking at it and saying, well, Pete Alonso's going to one of 3 places, so my team's just going to stand pat.
All right, we're going to try to get some updates from Blues practice here as we go along. It is, Luke Horak said on Twitter just a second ago, got to say it's been a pretty intense practice today. Jim Montgomery is not messing around. Jeremy Rutherford saying that Buchnevich not practicing today. He is in warm-up gear watching. We'll get an update from Monty afterward. It has also been noted by Luke Horak he did not see Brandon Saad at practice today. Noteworthy that Buch is there in practice gear but not practicing. Have not seen anybody mention that they've seen Brandon Saad in attendance.
And I've been checking the AHL transaction wire and the NHL transaction wire, and there have not been anything yet. And what I mean by the NHL one is typically you'll see waivers around like 1 o'clock Central Time. So, 1 o'clock Eastern Time, 12 o'clock Central Time. There's nothing yet. So I've been watching that. And then the AHL, obviously, you wonder if they're going to bring somebody up.
With Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we'll try to react to whatever we can that comes out of the Doug Armstrong media availability. That is expected to happen here within the next few minutes. But next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Better to Forget It here on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. You guys give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are betting it or forgetting it here on 101 ESPN. Alex, let's start out with this one. It's Freak Out Day here in St. Louis because
freak out.
The Blues are in a bad spot right now, and they're probably going to miss the playoffs again.
Yeah, Jim Montgomery is making these guys basically do killers, suicides, they used to call them.
Really?
And they're making them do lines in hockey right now. Blue line, red line. I think Jim Montgomery is going full Herb Brooks until somebody stands up and say, I play for the United States of America.
I mean, good.
Somebody
honestly,
will do it.
I say that as somebody who has never played organized hockey in my life, and when I go skating, I have no chance of being able to go backwards or to stop. I just go in a straight line. That's it. If you need me to turn, no
push off the board.
Yeah, it's a bad situation all around. But good. This is what needed. Yeah. At a certain point in time, it's got to change, man.
Yeah. I mean, after all of the words, now there's actions. And until somebody is willing to actually commit to giving the effort that Jim Montgomery is searching for, this is what practices are going to look like.
JR said, Blues are an hour into an up and down, pretty intense practice with more physicality than usual. Then he posted a video of them doing effectively what we called suicides while we were playing
the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah. All right. So bet it or forget it, Alex. The Blues will make a core roster move at some point prior to the start of next season. So we're talking about Booch, Thomas, Kyrou, Holloway, Broberg, Parayko, Benner. One of those 7 will be moved prior to the start of next season.
I'm going to bet it. If you're Doug Armstrong, you've been through this rodeo way too many times. You did it, as we mentioned, in the 2018-2019 season. You had to do it with TJ Oshie. You nearly did it 3 years ago, and then you were forced to do it at the trade deadline by moving Ryan O'Reilly. I'm going to bet this one. I think if you're him, this is not a good trend for your team. So what you need to do is find a way to make a roster move that sends waves through your team. I don't expect it to happen this season, so don't get your Elias Pettersson hopes up, Blues fans, because I know that's what everybody's jumping to. I would expect it in the offseason. I'm still
skeptical that an Elias Pettersson one gets done. A trade gets done.
I don't know how, if you're Vancouver, you can move him over JT Miller, but from what it sounds like, for the way people are reporting, I've got a dude who's going hard 24/7 that is getting in people's faces when they're not playing well, and a guy who apparently is not. And Rick Tocchet is Craig Berube light. He's a dude that just wants you to forecheck hard and play physical. That's JT Miller to a T. They have to make the decision. Do we want the 26-year-old centerman, or do we want the dude who's setting the standard for our team?
I'm going to say bet it, but I do so with very little certainty on this. The reason why I think they will make a move is just because of the timing on this. You look at the contract situations, and if I'm not mistaken, Thomas and Kyrou have a limited no-trade protection right now, and that changes within the next year or two.
I don't think Booch and Kyrou have any trade protection.
Excuse me, Kyrou and Thomas.
Yeah, Kyrou and Thomas. Booch has the limited trade. It's 12 teams now. This is all according to Puckpedia.
Sure.
Booch has a 12-team no-trade list that he's able to submit
next
Thomas
year. And Kyrou do not have anything until next season.
Yeah, and so by July 1st, Booch,
all
Thomas,
of those guys
Kyrou,
have full no-trade clauses.
Full no-trade clauses.
So that's why if you're going to make these moves, they've got to take place prior to July 1, because then you have zero leverage. Right now, you can negotiate with every team in the NHL to take on one of those players. And those teams will then have them for the next, 6 years.
Yeah.
That changes starting on July 1st. So if Army wants to change up the core group of players, that has to happen literally within the next 5 months.
Yep.
So I'll say bet it.
All right. Bet it or forget it. We see one player from the American Hockey League play with the Blues on Friday night.
Bet it.
I'm really starting to wonder if this is going to be Dalibor Dvorsky. And I know
Do you want him in this? Is that the guy you're calling up right now?
Do I want him in this? No.
That would go against everything Army has said all along, where it can't be a desperation move. It's got to be that guy's ready, and he's coming up to help us win.
Well, he's playing like he's ready to take the next step because he's playing better than everybody in the American Hockey League right now. I don't like the vibes of this team to put Dalibor Dvorsky in, but one, I'd like to get him a taste of the NHL, and two, I need to interject some youth. And I think the perfect threat, if you're Jim Montgomery, look at what they did last night on the power play, BK, after they gave up the shorthanded goal. Everybody was watching while Matthew Joseph, Nathan Walker, Jake Neighbors, it was Cam Fowler, and then
Tyler Tucker.
Tyler Tucker. Those were the guys on your power play. You know the best way to start to put a little threat into those players' eyes is if a Dalibor Dvorsky is there getting ice time over you. Is it going to look pretty? Probably not. I don't know if I want to do that, but I do think you have to do it at some point.
Wow. We have some breaking news. Let's go ahead and take that bet down
news.
if you don't mind.
I don't have the breaking news sounder, so we'll just do the T-bone. Breaking news!
According to Jeremy Rutherford, the St. Louis Blues have placed Brandon Saad on waivers. We thought it might come.
Yeah.
It was interesting that Saad and Booch were both off the ice today, and Booch was at practice and Brandon Saad was not.
Yep.
So, again, according to Jeremy Rutherford, who's going to join us coming up at the 1 o'clock hour, the St. Louis Blues have placed Brandon Saad on waivers. So, to answer your question that you just had, Alex, yeah, I think they're going to call somebody up because at this point they've got to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do they have to? No, because they'll have Texier. I mean, but
sure.
I think they will be calling somebody up. Now, they haven't yet. They won't have to. I would imagine you'd probably see it later on today or tomorrow because you want to kind of have them for a couple of skates, depending on where you're putting them in. I'm just going to speculate, truly speculating here. This is a Dalibor Dvorsky call-up, in my opinion. If
Who
Booch
else
isn't,
could it be?
So the NHL guys who have done this before, Alexandrov and Zach Dean, but both of those guys have been injured for the last month or so.
Okay.
You've got Mackenzie McEachran. I don't necessarily think they're going to do that.
Hugh McGing.
Hugh McGing or Matthew Pekka. All of those guys have played at the NHL level before. This is just me. If I'm Jim Montgomery, those guys don't move the needle for me. Because if Pavel Buchnevich is dealing with something, an ailment, he might not be playing Friday. My guess is he will, but they're taking it easy.
Sure.
Now you don't have Brandon Saad. There's 2 holes in your top 6 or top 9, however you want to view it. I think you're going to go down the path of a Dvorsky. You've got a Kaskamaki. You could try the Zach Dean, but again, he's been injured for like 2.5 months. They've got that Dylan Peterson kid that we've talked a little bit about, but those are very raw players.
So one thing, and this would be out of necessity, and again, it goes against what they've said. It does. And like they'll spin it, but it's just the honest to God truth. If they call up Dalibor Dvorsky right now, this was not the plan.
No. Just like it wasn't the plan with Zach Bolduc last year.
Right. That third line center has been a problem for them. They had Sonny there. He clearly wasn't the answer. They tried it with Matthew Joseph. By, I think, the second period, they had gone to Nathan Walker as that third line center. He ended up being the answer there, at least for last night. That is a spot that they have got to upgrade. They've got to improve there. And the one guy that can potentially do that for them that is currently down in the minors would be Dalibor Dvorsky. Mm-hmm. So then you would have Dvorsky on that third line. But who are his wingers in this scenario? You talking Joseph and Bolduc? So you got Dvorsky, Joseph, and Bolduc potentially going into that game?
I think if he comes up, he's not a centerman. He's playing the wing for you.
So then who's the third line center? Nathan Walker?
It'll stay Walker, Joseph, Sundqvist.
I'm putting him on at center.
I don't know if you can. I think you have to put guys that are responsible around him. And you can't do that right now.
But Nathan Walker's not a third line center, man. They don't have a third line center, if we're being honest. Like, I would rather see Radek Faksa as the third line center in that scenario that you're presenting. Because if I'm going to bring up the prized prospect that needs to be a foundational piece for my team, I can't put him into a situation where I'm a huge Nathan Walker fan.
Right.
I think he has been unfairly put in and out of the lineup over the last few seasons here in St. Louis. But that can't be the center that pushes Dalibor Dvorsky off of the position.
Here's the only reason why I'm saying I don't know if they use him at the center position, because I do still think they're trying to work with him in terms of the defensive side of the game. Now, maybe they don't rush this because, look, Dalibor Dvorsky was just named an AHL All-Star, and maybe they want him to enjoy the rest of this rather than come up into this show right now. To me, as much as you need a third-line center, I don't know if you have a third-line center in your system if it's not Dalibor Dvorsky. Like Dean, again, he's been hurt nonstop over this season, so I don't know if he falls into that. I think they're going to be looking for somebody who could come up and play in the top 6 on the wing.
And maybe.
And that's where it comes to, okay, well, do they bring up Nikita Alexandrov? Again, he's only played 17 games this season.
He's not a top 6 center.
No, he's not.
Top 6 forward.
This is this Marcus Silvegaard report that I think it was Mike Meyer that put this out, who covers Blues prospects, said, like, sounds like he's going back over to Europe to play in the Swedish Hockey League.
That ain't going to be the answer.
It's not, but he had 10 goals for the Thunderbirds in 35 games, so it's a goal scorer. Like, they're looking for offense to play with Robert Thomas.
Maybe the answer is Dalibor Dvorsky or a top line winger.
Could be.
Because Neighbors hasn't been the answer there.
That's what that's what.
And they clearly don't want Bolduc to be the answer there. Even though
Saad's
I
not
thought
the
it
answer.
played
They put him
okay.
through waivers. Like this is what they're doing right now. They're looking for somebody to play with Robert
Have you
Thomas.
looked at what the upcoming schedule is, though?
Yeah.
Like, you're introducing him potentially. This is all hypothetical. We don't know what the answer is going to be, but
they have
sent
2
Brandon
extra
Saad through
forwards.
waivers. If you're doing this, he would be debuting against Colorado, Utah, Edmonton, and Florida. Those would be the next 4 games where he's getting his feet wet at the NHL level. That is... Oof, talk about a bad situation to be thrown into. All right, if you guys want to get your thoughts in, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved. You guys can always check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/101ESPN STL, and you can leave us a mic drop on the Scott Lee Heating mic drop app. It's the mic drop feature on the 101 ESPN app. Give us your thoughts on where the Blues find themselves today and the news of the day that Brandon Saad is going on waivers as the Blues try to figure out how to get themselves out of this tailspin. All right, coming up next, talk a little bit more about the Blues and what we're hearing from Blues practice today, coming up here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you for a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Some news just coming out of Blues practice. Jeremy Rutherford, our Blues insider of The Athletic, reporting that Brandon Saad has been placed on waivers in the National Hockey League. It'll go in effect until tomorrow at 1 o'clock to find out if he was claimed or he'll be assigned to the Springfield Thunderbirds, the Blues American Hockey League affiliate. Blues fall to the Vancouver Canucks last night 5-2. They'll be back in action on Friday when they take on the Colorado Avalanche. With First Community Credit Union pregame starting at 7, puck drop at 8. Back to BK and Ferrario next. Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Alongside Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. So we have just been sent the audio from Doug Armstrong. Alex, whenever you get this pulled up, go ahead and let us know how long this is.
Play through it.
And we can just start playing through it. We can pause it as we want. So that way we can kind of react on the go to what Doug Armstrong had to say after Blues practice earlier today. If you're just joining us, the news coming out of Blues Morning Skate is that Brandon Saad has been placed on waivers. Pavel Buchnevich was at practice, but he was not actually participating. He was in his practice gear. He got the day off. Have not seen an update on exactly why that is the case, but they were expecting to get some more news on that after practice from Jim Montgomery. Doug Armstrong told the media, this is one thing that we can pass along. If Saad were to go unclaimed, he will go to Springfield and play for the Blues down at their AHL affiliate. So that is their plan as of today. If Saad were to go unclaimed, I think there's a chance he gets claimed by somebody. If I'm the Blackhawks, for example, he's played there before, obviously has a ton of history with that team, given the success that they had while he was there. They've got the cap space to make it work. And yes, it is an extra year on his contract, but it's $4 million. The team is terrible right now. He's a proven veteran, has some leadership ability, not a bad guy to have in the locker room. So I wouldn't be shocked to see something like that. But the fact that they had to put him through waivers and could not find a deal, a trade for him, it does speak to his lack of value across the NHL right now. So that is something worth keeping in mind as well. So again, the news of the day, it sounds like Brandon Saad going to be placed on waivers, and we'll see if he ends up getting claimed or not. But the plan for the Blues, if he goes unclaimed, they would send him down to Springfield to play in the AHL. So, BK,
this is about an 8-minute full thing, so I'm kind of ciphering through it, but I'll get this first clip for you since you're talking about Brandon Saad. This was Doug Armstrong. He opened up the press conference with an announcement of Scott Perunovich going to the Islanders yesterday. Figure we talked enough about that, but this was Doug Armstrong's comment on Brandon Saad.
Also today, as you saw, Brandon Saad wasn't on the ice. He's gone on waivers. He will go on waivers today at 1 o'clock. I talked to he and his representative, and obviously, if he gets claimed tomorrow, he'll be on a new team. If not, he'll go down to play in Springfield, and that will open up some space for some different players that I'd like to see get in the lineup and see where it goes. So
there it is. Yep. What's left unsaid there? Why are they doing this? Because they're done. This is a youth movement. That's what that announces. Is that, hey, Brandon Saad was here because we were trying to compete. And at this point in time, we see where we're at in the standings. We see the harsh reality of what it would take for us to be able to get into the postseason. We mentioned it earlier today. Matthew DeFrank's had it in his piece over in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. 31 games remaining. The Blues would need roughly 45 points to reach the typical threshold to get into the postseason. And that would require them to go 22-8-1 the rest of the way, or something similar. That is a 120-point pace. This team is not capable of playing at a 120-point pace over 31 games. Very few teams are capable of that. And I think Doug Armstrong just admitted the reality of what this team is at right now, which is we're not a playoff team. Yep. We wanted to be, we thought we were, but we're not. So that's why you would go this route. All right, Alex, let's go ahead and play the rest of this. We are going to pause this as we go along, but this is Doug Armstrong today after Blues skate, addressing the media on where things are at with the team right now and what their plans are.
Doug, how did it get to this point with Saad?
I think obviously the production's not there. I think he scored in 4 games this year. He's got 7 goals, 2 goals in 3 games. So, and we've for a couple of years, we've really nibbled around the edges, bringing in obviously different coaches, bringing in different support players, and but the record is still the same. And I think when I look at Broberg and Holloway and Fasca and Suter, I think they've done a nice job coming in, doing what we've asked them to do. But there's been a group that's been here for a while that things don't seem to be changing, and collectively you have to start chipping further and further up.
I'm going to stop it really quick there, BK, because first of all, we've discussed this before of how much of the play of Dylan Holloway makes some of the other players expendable. And I think he just told you that right there, because the play of Brandon Saad, you've had 4 goals in 3 games, I think he said, or it was 2 games that he scored those 4 goals in. Dylan Holloway made it replaceable, and those are new faces that came in and have played to Doug Armstrong standards. But what we talked about earlier in the show of the core that's in place, and you just said it. We got to start chipping away at this. And you start with a guy.
They've eliminated variables, and now it's suddenly, at some point, you have to look at the reality.
This is the easier one, and no disrespect to Brandon Saad, but this is the easier one to move on from. You put him on waivers. He's got 1 year left. You reassess it in the offseason. And if that doesn't start it, well, then you start kind of making your way through it after that.
On the Saad note, Dave Pagnotta says on Twitter, the Blues have tried to trade Saad for several weeks, but have come up empty. He's been willing to waive his full no-trade clause. He goes on waivers today at 1 o'clock.
Wow.
So Blues have been trying to deal Saad. There were no suitors out there available for him. Alex, you were saying this. You talked to people off the record last night, and there's just nobody interested in Brandon Saad across the league. So we'll see if he ends up getting claimed. Based on that report, my guess would be probably not. All right, let's continue with Doug Armstrong.
I mean, I know you said presents maybe an opportunity for other players to get in, but where do you see a guy like Dvorsky this season? Is he a guy that you can see come up and play NHL games? Is he ready, or do you want to
what we don't want to do is, when we talk about this, and it's a true belief, is we don't want to put players in positions to fail. That's a streaky bunch down there, but they've dealt with a lot of injuries. They're playing pretty good right now. I'm not really sure bringing any of them younger players up here right now would benefit them long term, but that could change in a week. It could change. But for right now, I'd like to see what Texier can do. As our season is gone, we've inserted and taken out that level of player, that part of our lineup, to know.
Sorry.
We'll try to continue this along here in just a second. Just a quick reaction. He basically just told you, we're not bringing up the young guys right now. It's the guys inside of that locker room. They've got to get this thing fixed.
Inserted and taken out that level of player, that part of our lineup, to know change above it. And so right now, let's just settle in with a group of guys and play and see what they can do. Our pro scout saw something in Texier, and now I'd like to see what they saw and give him an opportunity.
Like, there's a lot of ups. We saw 2 games against Calgary, but there's other times like what's going on right now. 3 coaches have kind of made similar comments about the team. From your 35,000 vantage point, what's missing with this team?
Well, I think there's been a belief in a core group of guys here, and as we're trying to retool, we're leaning heavily on a group of guys. And as I said, we brought in different coaches. And again, the Monty coaching thing wasn't a reflection on Drew. It was more the ability to get someone of Monty's caliber. So, but the record book's going to look, you're right, 3 coaches. But I don't know. It's something, I hear what they say after games. I hear what they say to you guys about their own play. And, obviously I can't really disagree with them. They're like last year, I thought, Buchnevich and Thomas had good years, statistically had good years, and Shen didn't have a good year, and this year it's reverse. So I think Shen's played very well since Monty's been here. We haven't had collectively our top 6 guys pull the rope in the same direction to allow the support group to really have an impact on our team. And I think that's what you see, and at least that's what I see right now. It's just our inability for our top end players to put long stretches of play together, where you have 5 of your 6 top forwards and 4 of your top 5D playing good for not days at a time or weeks at a time, but a month at a time or 6 weeks at a time. That's how you go on runs. You don't, so it's well documented that we haven't gone on a run yet this year, and a little bit concerning for our group is that last year with Drew, we went on a nice run, and then we got right into the playoffs, and instead of getting excited, I think we lost 5 or 6 or 6 out of 7 with Nashville, and then it took us right out of it. This year, coming out of the Christmas break, we looked at our schedule. We saw teams that we felt we needed to get wins against, not just compete, but get wins against. And now we're in January, and we're back in the same spot. We had an opportunity to gain ground, and we lost ground, and that's doing soul searching for all of us.
With Masad, I imagine you try to find a partner before you put him on waivers. Was there just not a market for him?
Yeah, I think right now that the cap is tight, and he's obviously statistically he's not having a great year, and he's got another year left. So if we could find a match, we would try. We don't make these decisions, wake up one day and not try and cultivate the best. I'd like to put the players in the best situation for success and also get the highest return for the Blues, and that was the same thing with Scotty. It's not like we don't not try to get the best assets that we can. The market speaks, and then you just react.
Doug, how troublesome is it for you when you're hovering around that wild card, but after a game like last night, you're hearing guys talk about energy is low, body language is negative. How bothersome is that for you?
Yeah, I would say from a manager's perspective or management, and I talk to Alex about it all the time, that's something that I really rely to the coach and the players to figure out. We're up here and we're just observing what's going on, and I'm not in the room. I don't know why they say those things. I don't know why they can't correct those things. I don't know why our home record is under 500. I don't know why we didn't embrace the opportunity of a 3-game homestand to make hay. But my job is to react, or not react to it, but to observe it and then say, okay, well, what do we need to do moving forward? And part of the retool is we're finding out positive and negatives about a lot of different people, a lot of different situations in our group.
Along those lines, what can you do at this point?
Observe. I mean, we're not. Or obviously, you talk to other teams about what they're going through. We are building for something in the future. We are excited about our participation in the World Junior. We're excited about how guys are playing in the American League right now. We're not going to use those type of assets to improve or hope to improve on this team. These guys are we're all making statements on where we're at in the league, in our positions. And so what I can do is just try and observe, try and work with Alex, try and work with Monty, try and push these guys to be the best they can be, and see where it goes.
Did you feel like there's any ability to shake things up, or is that difficult given the circumstances?
As I said, it's not like I don't talk to other managers. It has to fit for everybody. There's a lot of situations where I hang the phone up and I say that sounds really good for him. I'm not sure what's in it for me. And part of it, maybe I overvalue some of our guys, and that's part of what Alex and I are going through right now with Monty is, where are we at? Who's been here the longest? And do we have the same? Are we correct in our assessment of where they're at?
In the very near term, I mean, we would have 13 forwards, 60. Are you expecting guys to come up from Springfield just for bodies there?
Not right now. As I said, they have a pretty good thing going down there right now. Maybe, we're in Iowa this weekend. We can get somebody to Utah if we need to. But as I said, I don't say this the correct way. Like, if I want to see Texier play the less options that the coach has, the more likely he's going to play. So, okay.
Interesting. Okay, that last answer there is something worth noting. It sure sounds like Doug Armstrong believes Alexander Texier is a player. And we've now seen under multiple coaches The coaches don't seem to agree with that assessment. He gets in there, he gets an opportunity, and then he ends up out of the lineup again. There's a disconnect there. Now, I don't want to make more of this than needs to be made. That's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of the times where you see coaches and management disagree on a player because the management has a long view and the coach's view is, how do I win this game today? Well, Texier might be really good in a month, 2 months, 3 months, or a year. Maybe he's not the best guy to get in there right now and win the game today. And so it's different perspectives on the same question. But that appears to be the reason why Brandon Saad went through waivers. Like, why the urgency with that? Well, it's clear, based on no call-ups and him saying multiple times, I want to see Alexander Texier play, Saad's gone because they want to see Texier in the lineup. Yep. Or more specifically, Saad is gone because Army wants to see Texier in the lineup. Yep. So we had this question in the last segment of what do we think they're going to do here? Well, Dvorak's clearly not the answer.
No. None of the younger guys are. So the Kaskamaki, the Dean, like those guys aren't in this conversation right now. You'd be talking Hugh McGing, Matthew Pekka, and Nikita Alexandrov, guys that have had NHL experience before. And frankly, he just told you right there, I would rather see Texier in the lineup every night, Joseph in the lineup every night, and Bolduc in the lineup every night than bring one of those guys up and put him in the lineup and see.
Basically, he gave him the Moneyball situation.
Yeah.
Where in the movie said, oh, you want to play him? Well, he can't. He's traded. That's what just happened. Yeah. Mo did this with Mike Matheny. He was like, you can't keep going to these veterans. You can't. We have to give the young guys an opportunity. And eventually, okay, you're not going to stop? You're not going to stop playing Alan Craig? Well, he's gone. Who are you going to go with now? I just got you John Lackey. Craig's gone. Everybody in the clubhouse is miserable. They're all reacting as they see the announcement on television. Oh, my God, we just traded one of our favorite guys inside of the locker, or inside of this clubhouse. Well, he's gone. Go play the guys that I want you to play. Mo has done this before. Army just did the exact same thing.
Real quick, because I know we need to get to a break, but Army a couple of years ago, he had mentioned in one of the press conferences about how, you get a lot of calls from agents that say, hey, why is my guy not getting an opportunity? Hey, why can't we see this guy play? And then that offseason, he was able to move on from a lot of guys. And you know what he said? He said, I was able to call the agents back and say, well, we saw it and nothing happened from it. Zach Sanford was one of those guys. They gave him the shot and nothing happened from it. That's what I think he just basically said. Our pro scouts told us that Alex Texier has got something in the tank, but he can't play because he's not in the lineup. Zach Bolduc has stayed at the NHL level all season, but he's not playing every single game. Why? Because they want to win, and Brandon Saad's a veteran. And he basically just said, I don't need to see the guys in the AHL. Those guys are going to help us in the next couple of years. Right now, we need help, and we need it from our NHL players, and those guys need to play.
So I do also find it, I think Zach Bolduc's going to get some run here.
Oh, yeah, I think he'll get top six run.
It seems like they had like 4 guys for 2 spots a lot of the time.
Yeah, it was Walker, Bolduc, Joseph, Saad that were fighting for those playing spots.
Yeah, and now you're going to see those guys in the lineup more often. So that's something worth noting. I also found a couple of other things really interesting, and we'll go to break after this. I want to hear from you guys. 314-399-9646. That's the Air Comfort Service text line, and the mic drop features on the 101 ESPN app to react to Doug Armstrong and what he had to say today. And honestly, just his handling of the whole situation. I know we got a lot of texts that said how they appreciate that this is a little different in terms of the way that Army talks to the fans than what we hear sometimes for the Cardinals. Whether you think that matters or not really important, but I noticed that as well. One other thing a couple other things that I found interesting. He said, we're finding out positives and negatives within this group. The inability for top players to put together long stretches for a month is what's been the biggest issue for them. And then I thought the money line, are we correct in our assessment with where we're at? And he was talking about specific players, not like as a team, but on these players. Are we correct with our assessment of them? Yeah. And that's what I was trying to get at earlier today. It's not just hey, do these guys stink? It's hey, what if we thought that they were a number 1 center and they're actually a number 2 center? What does that mean for us long term? We'll talk a little bit more about that here from you guys as well on the other side here on BK and Ferrario.
The group that's been there for a while is the group that's the problem. Unfortunately, Thomas has not come up to what he was supposed to be. Neither has Pareko, neither has Kyrou. That's where the big salaries are going, and that's where they're supposed to be leaders. They are not. They have proven that they're not doing their jobs. That's who needs to go, and we need to start fresh with new players that are willing to put their self on the line and go out there and skate hard every day and shoot the puck.
Hell yeah, Janet. Always good to hear from Janet. That is via the Scott Lee Heating mic drop feature on the 101 ESPN app. If you want to get your thoughts in on what has taken place today with the St. Louis Blues and last night, really over the last 2 weeks, the Blues have lost 4 of their last 5 games. Doug Armstrong met with the media just a little while ago. He announced that the Blues were going to be placing Brandon Saad on waivers. He wants to see Alexander Texier in the lineup. This is going to allow them the runway to be able to do so. Does not anticipate young players being brought up to the being brought up from the AHL to the NHL, so I wouldn't anticipate a Dalibor Dvorsky call-up anytime in the immediate future. Did say that could always change, but doesn't see that right now. So the guys in that locker room today are the guys that are most likely going to get them to the finish line prior to that Four Nations face-off, and you have 5 games left: Colorado, Utah, Edmonton, Florida, and Chicago until then. Alex, we do have this cut from Doug Armstrong that we wanted to react to here, and he's talking about the core group of players right now and what they can actually do about this. Here's Doug Armstrong earlier today.
As I said, it's not like I don't talk to other managers. It has to fit for everybody. There's a lot of situations where I hang the phone up and I say, that sounds really good for him. I'm not sure what's in it for me. Part of it, maybe I overvalue some of our guys, and that's part of what Alex and I are going through right now with Monty is where are we at? Who's been here the longest? And do we have the same, are we correct in our assessment of where they're at?
What'd you make of that, Alex?
So this takes me back to the 2018-2019 season again. And I mentioned this in the open to where Doug was looking at this team, and it's like, I don't want to trade these guys. These are pillars for our team. But I can't keep bringing in new coaches to figure things out. And you heard him earlier in the press conference talk about, really it's 2 guys. Drew Bannister, unfortunately, was circumstantial because Jim Montgomery was there. But what I hear from that is Doug Armstrong looks at this team as almost a finished product. You've got the prospects in the system that are ready to contribute. The guys that have been given the contracts from the Blues, those are the guys that are supposed to take this to the next level. Thomas, Kyrou, Pavel Buchnevich. And the evaluation of these guys is, no, I'm not going to move these guys. Take you back to the last trade deadline, BK, last year, when Pavel Buchnevich was a pending UFA. And they were like, do we sign him? Do we not sign him? I guarantee there was interest in Pavel Buchnevich. Elliot Friedman reported that. But Doug Armstrong evaluated that and said, no, this is a guy that contributes to our team's success moving forward. Let's lock him up. And that's what I made of that comment. Are they evaluating these guys too close to their system and saying, we've already got our top line? Do you remember how many times we asked last season, BK, to all of the national analysts we had on our show, is Kyrou Thomas Buchnevich a top line in the National Hockey League?
And everybody nationally said yes.
Everybody. Jeff Merrick. I don't think we didn't have Elliot Friedman. I had Friedman on for pregame earlier this year. He talked about those guys being top players. Everybody thought they were.
Bucci.
But Doug Armstrong is looking at it and saying, are we evaluating these guys too much? Because was there something available to us this past offseason that would have made our team a little bit closer to being a completed product? I really think what Doug Armstrong is doing now is reevaluating who these top guys are for their team.
Yeah, and my interpretation of that was, did we think they could be more than what they actually are capable of?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean, because I think sometimes when you say something like that, people immediately go to, BK, are you saying that they're a bust? Or are you saying that these just aren't good players? Like, I wholeheartedly disagree with all of that. And that's not what I'm trying to say. I think Robert Thomas is a really good hockey player. I think Pavel Buchnevich is a really good hockey player. But at one point in time, I would assume like Doug Armstrong, believed that those guys were not only really good players, but guys that you could win with as top-line players and not just win to get into the playoffs, but potentially win a cup. I thought they were going to get there. And I no longer am certain of that. I'm not sure if Robert Thomas is going to be the type of player that you can win a cup with as your number 1 center. unless everything around him is perfect. I'm not sure that Pavel Buchnevich is a guy that is on a top line on a contending team for a cup. And you mentioned the 2018-19 team, Alex. I go back to a buddy of mine texted me the other night and said, do you guys remember that 2011-2012 team? And that was obviously a much better time for the Blues than where they're at right now.
Yeah,
they had added Ken Hitchcock, and they had 109 points that season. That was a really good team. But they decided they had a bit of a core issue. They had Berglund, TJ Oshie, and David Perron at that point. Their top producing forward was David Backes. He's the captain. You're not getting rid of him. That's a guy that's like implementing everything that you're building around. But the next three guys were Oshie, Perron, and Berglund when you looked at their overall point production. Those guys were 25, 23, and 23. And it became a question of, okay, who are you building around and who do you need to switch out of this? And what they decided eventually was 1 year later, I think the guy, or a couple of years later, I think TJ Oshie is going to be the one that we're going to have to move. And eventually, Berglund had to move on as well. And that's when you were able to get Ryan O'Reilly. And eventually, they decided not to trade him, but expose David Perron into expansion drafts, and they moved him to Edmonton. So,
well, they had previously traded him too because they felt like he wasn't fitting into their system.
So you had to move on from some of the core group of players, and that feels to me like the situation you're in right now. And I don't know if it's immediate or if it's something that's going to take a little bit of time, but that to me feels like it's where you're at right now with the Blues.
One more. Because when you talked about, that's why we brought in Jim Montgomery, and we're having conversations with Jim Montgomery. When they said, what do you do next? He said, evaluate. He said, watch this team.
Yep.
And that's why
observe. I think was the word that he used.
That is why you brought in Jim Montgomery. Doug Armstrong believes Jim Montgomery is the right conductor of that train. They got to figure out if all of the pieces of the train are going to work in the same system. And when you've got Doug Armstrong and Alex Steen that are evaluating now, I think what this is you're putting everybody on high alert. You're putting everybody in that room on high alert, much like they did in that 18-19 season, to where we don't know if these are the right pieces. And Jim Montgomery's evaluating it. Doug Armstrong's evaluating it, which is why if this does not get righted, I do really believe that they're going to look at this and say, we've got to make some type of change.
All right, so we've got Jeremy Rutherford coming up in about 15 minutes. He's going to bump to 1:30 today. He's got to get a piece up for The Athletic. That's his primary
What's
gig.
going
We
on
totally
today?
understand the Brandon Saad story. He's got to get that up over on The Athletic. So be sure to read that after he posts it on The Athletic. But he's going to join us in about 15 minutes. I did find this interesting. Somebody from the 314 said, guys, what the Blues are going through is very similar to what the Cardinals are going through or have been through, where they have really good players, but they're missing those top guys that end up getting you to a championship contending window. I want to talk about that on the other side, Alex. We'll do that here on BK and Ferrario. Hear from you guys as well. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line, and the mic drop features on the 101 ESPN app. You're listening to BK and Ferrario.
So Janet brings up a good point, but that doesn't solve your problem. Bringing in a bunch of new people and getting rid of people, that's just going to introduce new problems because you don't know what these new people's problems are. You know what your problems are right now. If you can't fix them, then get rid of the problem. But there's no point in getting rid of all your problems just to bring in a bunch of new problems. You need to get what you need. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes what you want isn't what you need.
Some deep stuff by Ed there. I actually do kind of agree with what he's saying. Like, it's not easy to go out there and say we're going to trade one of our culture pillars to go get another culture pillar, because you're basically trading for a guy that's supposed to fit into your system right away and understand what you're putting out there. And this isn't a team that's like, we've got Stanley Cup aspirations and our top guy's not doing it, so let's go get Mikko Rantanen. Like, you're bringing in somebody who realizes this team is going to struggle for a couple of games, or I'm sorry, for the rest of this season, and then reset again next year.
And beyond that, if we had at this point last year been having these conversations, and we would have talked about Jordan Kyrou the way that we're currently talking about Pavel Buchnevich and Robert Thomas. And at that point in time, if they had traded Jordan Kyrou, we wouldn't have seen this version of Kyrou in a Blues uniform. And instead, he would have been taking these opportunities and doing it elsewhere. As a 26-year-old winger making $8 million, who's on pace to score 30 to 35 goals this year as a plus 11 on the ice. Well, that's the exact player that we all wanted him to be, but he hadn't shown that yet. Right. And so it's a question of, is this a down year for Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich, or is this the expectation moving forward? Because Thomas last year, we were talking about, oh, he's taken that step. He's now a guy that you could count on in those number one center situations where he is taking that big face-off in his own end, and he's winning that for you. He's playing the full 200-foot game. And beyond that, he's also more than a point-per-game producer. We had 86 points last year, and the question going into the offseason was, okay, is this the jumping-off point? And now he's going to be a 100-point player if he gets that number one winger next to him? And instead, it's been, oh, no, it's going back to what it was 2 years ago instead of what it was last year, and maybe last year was the outlier. And that's the concern, I think, for a lot of fans. So I get what Ed's saying there of you can't just trade all of your problems and potentially bring in new ones. There's some truth to that. But also, if you keep doing the same things over and over and over again, and you've changed out all of the pieces around them, coaching staff has changed, supporting cast has changed. Well, there are a few things that have remained internal, and it's really that core group of players that you're building around. So that's the thing you have to look at, and that's why I think Doug Armstrong is going to be doing what he said, which is observing. He's got to look at what you have right now with his team. And I don't think this is something that gets fixed at the deadline. No. This is something that happens between the end of the year and that July 1st deadline of trading these guys before they get the no-trade clause. So that's what the next 5 months are for the Blues.
Well, and I do really believe that you're going to look at these next couple of years and say, or next couple of months and watch this team and find out. Joey said it last night, and Joey prefaced it by, look, Alex, I've been covering the Blues since 2018. He said, I've been in the National Hockey League or around the National Hockey League since 2011. And he said, I know when a team needs a spark. I know when a team needs something to happen to wake everyone up. And he said, that's what needs to take place. And I said, does the AHL fix that? Like a call-up? And he said, maybe. He said, maybe that, maybe a move, maybe a trade. Something has to happen to wake everybody up in that locker room and say, this cannot continue to go forward. That's what the Brandon Saad move was. And now is when the real evaluation takes place. Because what happens when you start one wave, the next wave comes in. The next wave comes in. But does the team respond to it? Do they go on a 5-6 game win streak? Because now Doug Armstrong has basically said, we're evaluating everything that's going to take place for the rest of this year. And then everyone starts to wake up. And if they don't, that's when the next wave comes.
Yeah, but even if they did for a 6-game stretch, I don't care. It has to be so much more than that, dude. Yeah. Like, the next 6 games mean very little to me at this point.
The rest of this I don't know. Does this season mean anything? Like, if they go on a run and end it the way that they did last year, to where they look great, but then at the end it kind of lays a dud and you miss the playoffs.
It can, because at that point, at least they've shown me life.
Like, how can you trust it again? How can you trust it with Thomas and Buch if they do it after what you just saw?
The only way you trust it is if you have. It's the old saying of you are as faithful as your choices, right? The Blues might not have an alternative. Yeah, it's great to say in theory you trade Buch, you trade Thomas, you trade Kyrou, you trade whoever, right? Like, send all of them away, as Janet said. In theory, cool, great. What are you getting in return? Right. I don't want draft picks. That's not something that's going to help me, because the Blues are supposed to get better quicker, not be further away. I'm not interested in really young players, the ilk of a Zach Bolduc. Like, that's not helping me with my top line problem. If you're trading these guys, you're looking to acquire superstar talents. Like, you're looking at Elias Pettersson, who appears to be a bit of a malcontent in his own right. You're looking at a Brady Tkachuk. Like, you're looking at guys that are potentially in this pre-agency, as the NBA has termed it, where they've got a year remaining on their deal, similar to what we just saw with Mikko Rantanen, and their team knows we're not going to be able to re-sign them, and then you get the Matthew Tkachuk trade, or you're trading away guys that are really good players, but Jonathan Huberdeau had an outlier season, and they knew they probably weren't going to get that again. And Mackenzie Weegar's a really good defenseman, but he's like a number 2 or 3 defenseman, not in terms of like second or third pair, like a number 2 or 3 defenseman on a really good team. Probably not a number 1 guy, so you can afford to lose him for Matthew Bleep and Tkachuk.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of moves that the Blues should be looking for this offseason, but that's so much easier said than done. And more often than not, teams make the move for the Matthew Tkachuk, and it becomes Pierre-Luc Dubois, and now, oh no, we've traded all of our depth and some really good players, and what we got in return was a guy that clearly does not fit with our team. So that's what the next couple of months of our observation is going to be for the Blues, is finding out, can we build around these guys? And if our answer to that question is no, what is the alternative?
And the one problem with all of this, too, is, and this is why you're not seeing Dvorsky, if they don't have it right with those guys, you can't throw that burden on Dvorsky and Snuggerud to be it. And that's why you're not seeing Dvorsky get a call-up right now, because people probably would love to see that. But you can't put the burden of what Thomas and Buchnevich and Kyrou are supposed to be on Dvorsky and Snuggerud. And that's the dangerous situation that the Blues are in, because if those guys don't live up and you're not able to make the swap for a guy that can come in and fill that void, now you're waiting for that, and then you really are stuck in the middle.
I do want to hear a little bit from Jim Montgomery, because he had 2 interesting, I thought, quotes earlier today. This audio is coming from our own Jordan Deacon, who was out at practice for us. Shout out to her for getting both the Doug Armstrong audio and Jim Montgomery. We did not know that all of this was going to be taking place today. So
an hour ago.
She on very short notice was willing to go out there for us. So huge thanks to her for getting all of this audio for us. Here's Jim Montgomery on Alexander Texier, who it sounds like is going to get a little bit more of an opportunity here.
I think there's a lot there in Texier. You know, I thought that right before Christmas, he had those 3 games in a row where he was really good. And unfortunately, got sick, and it seems like the rhythm has never come back. He had a real good game in the Winter Classic, and it's just, again, it's the inconsistency from game to game and what we can expect from individuals has translated into the team. I don't know if that's individuals affecting the team more, or is it the team affecting individuals? And that's where we, you know, and especially myself as a coach, need to figure that out.
He's not wrong. I mean, before the Winter Classic, Dvorsky was playing with Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich, and I think Texier what it was. I think he scored 2 goals in 3 games or 2 goals in 4 games.
2 and 3, yeah.
But then he got sick, came back for the Winter Classic, played a 4th line role for the Blues in the Winter Classic, did score a goal late, which was kind of chump change at that time. But he showed the offense. But he has been a very inconsistent player, which is why I can understand why the Blues coaching staff hasn't trusted him in terms of playing consistently.
Yeah, I mean, the guy that they took out of the lineup and put through waivers today was also inconsistent, so I'm fine with getting him an opportunity. I see no issue with it. I've never seen it with Texier. The way that when I hear people talk about Texier, like, obviously Doug Armstrong, huge believer. Or I hear some people around the rink talk about Texier, and it's like, oh, this guy was amazing. I remember after the first game, I was like, did I watch a different game than everybody else? Because I had heard so many great things about him, and I just didn't see it. So I suppose we'll find out together, because he's clearly going to get a little bit of run here. The other thing that Montiel was asked about was Doug Armstrong's comments that they're unlikely to call up young players, and I thought this was really interesting for Monty.
Doug and his staff know those players a lot better than us coaches do. We work with the players that we work with daily. I do know, and I've always believed this, it doesn't matter what level, it doesn't matter if junior hockey, college hockey, and you go to the American League and then you go to the NHL League. No one has ever arrived too late to a league, but a lot of people have arrived too early. And it can affect your confidence. and then it's a battle to get that back. So, I think Army's been through this so many times with so many great prospects and first-round picks, so I think he knows the right path.
This is one thing that I really appreciate about the Blues that the Cardinals just get wrong.
Yeah.
Cardinals rush too many guys to the major league level and then ask them to be something more than what they're capable of being at that point in time. Like, they hate putting guys into the bench role, and sometimes that's just what you need to be at the major league level. Whereas the Blues are like, hey, we're gonna let this guy get some seasoning. He's gonna be in every situation at the AHL level, and then whenever the opportunity presents itself at the NHL level, we'll get him up here when they're good and ready. But don't push Dalibor Dvorsky just because you're in desperation mode. That's the opposite of what you should be doing. What you do is you let him wait down there and you say, hey, guys in the locker room, it's your turn to figure this thing out, and we'll see if it ends up working out or not. All right, Jeremy Rutherford was out there for all of the media opportunities today. Talked to Jim Montgomery, talked to Doug Armstrong. I think the locker room was open as well. We'll ask him what he learned today and what his outlook is for this team coming up next. JR here on BK and Ferrario.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends out at Classic Air Care, who've been making people comfortable since 1926. They trust their work so much that they're backed by thousands of reviews, over 3,000 of them up on Google+, a 4.8 rating for the customer service, the incredible technicians that you get when you do your work with Classic Air Care. This one from Andrea. Vince was the best, kind, knowledgeable, super helpful, was so grateful that he volunteered to work this Sunday. It was truly a blessing. Thanks to Vince, I sincerely appreciate all the help and assistance, especially setting me up on an affordable maintenance program so it won't cost an arm and a leg. You are a tremendous asset to this company and customers. The maintenance agreement, let me tell you, it saves lives for people when it comes to your HVAC going out in the middle of the summer, the middle of the winter. You're on that agreement. You could call them. You get priority when you schedule your appointment to come out, have everything fixed. Use the company that I've been using since 2016. My family's been using since the 90s. It's Classic Air Care. Make sure when you schedule online or when you call them to schedule, tell them Alex Ferrario sent you. Classic Air Care and ClassicAirCare.com.
I'm Jordan Deacon. The SportsCenter update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Last night, the Blues lost to the Vancouver Canucks by a score of 5-2. Today, after a tough conditioning practice, General Manager Doug Armstrong announced that Brandon Saad has been placed on waivers. If he's not picked up, he will go down to Springfield. We're discussing those things and more with our Blues insider, Jeremy Rutherford, next here on 101 ESPN. I'm Jordan Deacon. The SportsCenter update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Alongside Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley. Jordan Deacon in the studio for us today after Tanner Hendrickson he had to step out.
Yeah, he did.
It just wasn't his day. Things were not going well for our guy T-Bone, but Jordan has stepped up for us today. She went out to Centene for us, grabbed all the audio from Doug Armstrong, Jim Montgomery, and now we are joined by the one and only Jeremy Rutherford. You can find his great work over at The Athletic, where he already has a piece up breaking down the Brandon Saad news from today. He is being sent through waivers. Blues expecting a little bit more playing time for the foreseeable future for Alexander Texier. JR joins us via the Callier and Thompson hotline. JR, slow news day, huh?
Yeah, real slow. And speaking of slow, Jordan, she get a speeding ticket on the way back to the station? She was standing here a minute ago, and then she's calling me from the station.
I have no comment. No comment on that one. No comment.
Speedy Gonzalez out here.
Plead the fifth on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never happened.
JR, I'm going to start this kind of big picture-wise. What did you make of Doug Armstrong announcing earlier today that he was going to be available to the media, and then the decision that they made with Brandon Saad? Like, what do you make of everything that we heard today from the St. Louis Blues?
Yeah, I think we all expected something after last night's game. You go on a 3-game homestand after the win in Vegas, and you feel like, okay, yeah, we lost a game in Utah that we would have liked, but we came away with a shootout win in Vegas, and now we've got the home schedule, and let's see if we can do something with the schedule, and they couldn't. And they lost 3 games, and we saw continuously some of the same issues that have plagued this team. I wrote in my article today for the past 3 years, like the issues that we're talking about are issues that are 2.5, 3 years old. When you talk about the start of games, when you talk about special teams, when you talk about dealing with adversity. And so I wasn't surprised that we heard from Doug Armstrong. I know that he's made it a point in the past year or so that he tries to limit the number of times that he comes out and has these types of press conferences. He did start off the press conference today by saying, hey, listen, guys, this isn't a State of the Union. I'll just take a few questions. But then we get the news that Brandon Saad is going on waivers. Obviously, knew something could be up as he was not on the ice for practice today, but he's now on waivers officially. As of 1 o'clock, they'll find out his fate in the next 24 hours, whether he goes to Springfield or he's picked up by another team. And I think it's going to be the first of some dominoes, not to say that everything will come to fruition that Doug Armstrong would like to do, but in his words, he said there's a group of players who've been around for a long time. It hasn't been working out, and now we just need to chip away further.
JR, did you get the vibe that Doug Armstrong is maybe starting to question some of the evaluations that they had on their top players that are supposed to be core players for this team?
Not so much question. I think that as he talked about the production of the top players, the top 6 forwards we're kind of talking about here, he touched on the fact that they haven't produced at the same time. And so he said that Robert Thomas, Pavel Buchnevich have been productive in the past, and that Thomas has this year, and that Braden Shen was a guy who didn't have it last year, but he's played well this year, and he feels like they just haven't all played well together. So, whether it's questioning the evaluation of those players, he was obviously right in the middle of that. He's the guy who signed these players to the contracts that they have. So I don't think that he's looking at, how they've evaluated these guys for the past couple of years and gave them the big deals that they did, more so than he thinks they can produce on a more consistent basis. And he said, we're not looking at days at a time. We're not looking at weeks at a time. We need months at a time where these guys come together and play the way they're capable of. And they just haven't done that. I mean, you look at Thomas and Buchnevich right now, I think it goes back 8 games now 3 points for Thomas, 2 points for Buchnevich. Buchnevich just 2 assists. Those are the guys that if this team has a chance to be in the wild card, and I'm going back, we've been saying this for 2, 3, 4 weeks now, those guys have to be at the top of their games.
We're talking to Jeremy Rutherford, Blues insider for The Athletic. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at JP Rutherford. If you follow him over there, you can get his latest piece breaking down. And first of all, from last night, a really good one, where the team is at. And then from today, the news piece on the Blues deciding to put Brandon Saad through waivers. JR, just because you were there, out of curiosity, we know Doug Armstrong spoke to the media today. Jim Montgomery always speaks after morning skate. Were players made available today after practice?
It was actually just Braden Shen today, and usually the locker room opens up and we head in there after Jim Montgomery speaks inside that media room. But today they brought Braden Shen out to speak to the media, so he was the only player today.
And what was his message?
Yeah, I respect Braden Shen. I think that, over the years, he's a guy who has a pulse of the room and, knows that when Doug Armstrong speaks that it's something the players have heard a lot, but sometimes maybe the media is hearing for the first time out of the words of Doug Armstrong. But he said that, listen, we know what we've got to do in this room. And when you guys hear from Doug that there's a group here that isn't getting the job done and that they need to chip away at it, listen, we've heard that before. And so it kind of led me to think that, well, if you guys have heard this before, why haven't we seen results from some of those guys? And I just think that you go back to where this team is. That's where I keep going back to. This is a retool. And there, of course, are some guys on this roster. We find out, today, the move with Brandon Saad, he being one of them, that, of course, the team would like to move on from some of these players and make this thing happen faster and kind of reset this roster quicker. But you can't do it when guys have contracts. Like, look at Brandon Saad. If he clears waivers tomorrow at 1 o'clock, he's going to go to Springfield. The Blues still have him on their roster at that point. He's on the books next year for $4.5 million cap hit for another year. There is a no-trade clause. It does change to a modified deal next year, a 12-team no-trade list for Brandon Saad. But, those are the kinds of obstacles that the Blues are working with right now in trying to move on from this roster. And you can say that Doug Armstrong is the one who signed these contracts and put them in position. And, hey, that's true. And there's a lot of criticism to go along with that. However, there's also the price of doing business to get some of these guys to sign and to get them to play and come in, like a Buchnevich, other guys. I just think that you can criticize Doug for making these moves. It's just going to go back to those evaluations that Alex was asking about earlier, that when they identify a guy who they want to come in and play for the St. Louis Blues, the going rate for these guys is what they've been paid by Doug, and these clauses that come with the contracts are the clauses that guys are getting around the league. So it's a tough spot. If they come in here and don't produce, then that puts teams across the league, not just the Blues, in a tough predicament.
And I'm not disagreeing with any of that, JR, but I think maybe part of my frustration with all of this is, I think Holloway has been better than any of us could have expected, and Broberg has lived up to all of the expectations. Yes, the numbers have certainly slowed, and there have been moments that have been a little more bumpy lately than it was earlier on in the season, but even Zach Bolduc, while he's been in and out of the lineup, when he's been in there, he's had some young moments, but he's been pretty good for the most part this season. I think where a lot of the ire comes from Blues fans is with Thomas and Booch and Falk. And yes, they're going through a retool, but those are guys that should be either in their prime or entering their prime. It's year 7 now for Robert Thomas. And I think that's where things get a little frustrating, alarming, whatever word you want to use to describe it is. That's not supposed to be where the retool is falling short. Those are guys making $6 and $8 million for not just this year and next, but for the foreseeable future. And those are 3 of the guys that have probably underperformed the most on the team this year.
100%. I agree 100%. Here's the situation. I think you look at Robert Thomas. I've written the words face of the franchise. He has to live up to that. Now, I don't want to minimize this little spell that he's going through, however you want to look at it. But it's not just December that he had a great month. You go a couple games into January, he had a 2-goal game against Edmonton. It's about an 8-game stretch here. So I always try to be careful in these situations. Sure. that he doesn't pop off for 6 goals in the next 6 games, and then we're kind of following the cycle and getting caught up in each cycle with him. For Pavel Buchnevich, to me, it's a much bigger issue. You're talking about a guy who's signed this long-term extension that doesn't even kick in till next year, and he's been quiet offensively most of the season. I've had these conversations with people around the organization. How much of an impact, how much of a detriment was it that he started the year at center? Like, does that just get you off to this, situation where you're not producing, you don't have the numbers, and now you're second-guessing yourself in a lot of different situations, and he just hasn't been able to find, his pace. And so with Buchnevich, you hope that he gets untracked too, but we haven't seen that from him. Even though he doesn't have but 2 points in the last 8 games, it's obviously been a bigger issue. And then with Falk, I look at his situation. He hasn't been good this year. I think everybody can agree with that, but it's not like you signed the contract a year or 2 ago. This is a contract that they identified several years ago when they made the trade with Carolina, and they made their bed with it. He came here to St. Louis, had a tough first year, great second year. You hope that he's going to be that type of player. And at this point right now, he's not. But that falls back in what I was saying earlier is, what do you do about it at this point? If you're making phone calls around the league, are there any suitors? Is there any interest? If not, what do? You play the player. This is the contract that they've made their bed with.
JR, final one for me, and I'm going to try and set this up a little bit before I ask the question, but 3 years ago was when the Blues team traded away a lot of those assets. They missed the playoffs, and Doug Armstrong kind of put that label on, look, we want this to be kind of like a 3-year window, kind of like the LA Kings in terms of turning this around. That season they moved on. There have been 18 players that were a part of that roster that have went away to different areas. They've also gone through 3 different coaches, 2 assistant coaches, and then 4 different coaches, 2 assistants, and then 2 head coaches. If this thing doesn't get righted by the end of this season in terms of consistent energy, consistent attitude, having that 60-minute game that they've talking about, are there more drastic measures that could come this offseason?
I think there could be. I specifically asked Doug Armstrong. People ask about these questions. I said, Doug, there's been 3 coaches now in the last 24 months say a lot of the same things about this group, and he said, hey, you're right. He said there's a caveat that they made the change to Jim Montgomery just because they felt like he was the coach available that they wanted moving forward. But he agreed, hey, 3 coaches saying the same thing. He hears the same things that we hear post-game. Doug Armstrong, and we'll have it up at the Athletic later, he said that, I question some of the things these guys are saying post-game too. Like, well, why can't you change that? Why can't you turn that around? So I think he's definitely going to be looking, as he has been, the offer sheets, Broberg, Holloway. You look at the move today with Brandon Saad, but these are all going to be moves that might be 2-3 months in between each one of them, and it might not be a splashy move when they are announced. Like today, it's not as big as something with Broberg and Holloway, but he's going to have to, as he said, chip away at it. It could be 2 more months before we see something. We might not see Dvorsky, for another month. These are things that are going to take time to evolve. And as we've seen with Doug, Alex, in the past, he's been ready to pounce when the opportunity came. But he told us today he picks up the phone and he calls a lot of GMs around the league and talks to them. And when he hangs up, what he said he has thought recently is, yeah, well, that sounds good for that guy, but it doesn't sound very good for the St. Louis Blues. So I just think that they're in a position right now where the assets that they would like to move on from aren't attractive around the league, and it's going to be tough to cut ties with some of these players, and it's just going to take some time for that to happen.
Jared, like 30-second answer here, but if that's how they view it now, does he have to change his mindset, Doug Armstrong, in terms of listening to trades a little bit differently?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, if you're talking about like losing out on a few of the deals just for the sake of moving on from those guys, yeah, I mean, you're going to have to at some point try to make those very difficult decisions and just figure that you're going to lose out on some of that stuff, and it could be better for the team in the long run.
JR, appreciate the time as always, my man. Thanks so much for hopping on with us. I know it's an incredibly busy day for you. You got a lot of stuff going on over at The Athletic. People should be reading over there and subscribing if they aren't already. Thanks for the time as always. We'll talk with you again next week.
Yep, thanks, boys. Good conversation. Talk to you later.
Thanks, That's Jeremy Rutherford joining us as he does each and every Tuesday here on BK and Ferrario. Coming up next, we're going to put a bow on this thing with our BK and Ferrario Rewind, reacting to all of the news. It was a whirlwind of a day for your St. Louis Blues here on 101 ESPN. With Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley for our friends at Circus Sports in Illinois. Alex, winning at sports betting is difficult sometimes, as we have seen from our sports betting failures over the course of the season. However, when you win, I want to win the most money possible, and that's why we bet with Circus Sports in Illinois. For example, on the big game coming up about a week and a half from now, Chiefs are a 1.5-point favorite. The over is set at 49.5, and I like the Chiefs, and I like the over in this game. If I bet that for $100 over on the Circus Sports app, I'm winning $265 if I win that bet. If I made the exact same bet, change nothing about it, put the exact same money down, I only win $245 over on FanDuel. You're winning more money when you bet with Circa.
Yeah, this is why you need to download the app for whatever you're looking for. That big game in the NFL, you want that. Maybe you just want some hockey parlays. I do a lot of those during this time of the year. You know that, the big parlays that don't typically work out for me, but I'm bringing in the most money possible thanks to Circa Sports Illinois. So download the app today for all of your sports betting needs. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. Let's run it back with a daily rewind on BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Gloria Lou, your home sold guaranteed realty. Selling your home begins at GloriaHasTheBuyers.com.
and Jordan Deacon in for Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. It was a long day for the St. Louis Blues. Alex, we've just got another minute or two left here on the show. If you missed anything from it, check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com. And the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Schaefer Door Company.
That 101 ESPN app is free to use. It is easy to enjoy, and that is presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. Alex, we've talked about the Blues almost the entirety of today's show, and that is because they sent Brandon Saad through waivers. Doug Armstrong talked to the media and said, hey, no reinforcements coming up. This is not a time for young players to come help us. We need the guys inside of that locker room to dig us out of this hole. Alexander Texier is likely going to get those opportunities that are opened up by Brandon Saad going through waivers. What do you make of today, Alex? What do you make of it?
The Blues are making a statement about their struggles, and it's directed towards their best players. What took place with Brandon Saad today is kind of similar to what took place with Craig Berube a few years ago. Now, Brandon Saad, of course, has a lot to say in this one, like Craig Berube, because he wasn't performing well. But I think this was the start of more waves for a Blues team that's looking for answers as to why the culture is poor with this team. And you look no further than the guys who have been here that were supposed to right this ship 3 years ago. The three worst players in terms of plus-minus on the team since January 1st are Justin Falk, Pavel Buchnevich, Robert Thomas. Those three combined for a minus 21. And they also combined for a total of 20 points. So Doug Armstrong is not pleased with where this team is at, and it's the same problem that's reoccurring for the last 3 years. And I think Doug Armstrong's finally gotten to the point where he says, now we really need to observe what our top players look like and find out if there needs to be changes there.
We played the entirety of Doug Armstrong's media availability earlier today, so you can find that on the podcast for today's show. You will also be able to, I'm sure, hear plenty of reaction to that coming up on the Fast Lane today. For Alex Ferrario and Jordan Deacon, I'm Brandon Kiley. I'm out the rest of the week. Alex will be in.
Timing.
We'll see you with T-Bone. Maybe Jordan's going to hang around. A lot of fun to be had. The Fast Lane coming up next here on 101 ESPN.